Hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am Nerdslayer, your host. Today is Monday, the 22nd of July, and this is episode 43 of the podcast. On this week's podcast, we will talk about some... It's Monday time. On this week's podcast, we will talk about a lot of good stuff, but we'll also talk about maybe at the start of the podcast, something that kind of got me a little bit sad and some solemn news, and I'll probably get that out of the way. In fact, I'll just get it out of the way now before I do my little show rundown. There's been recent news that's come out that unfortunately, and sorry, this is pretty new, and even for myself, it affects me as well, but InControl, as he was known in the StarCraft community, or Geoff Robinson, I guess if you knew him on Twitter or knew him in person, apparently he suddenly passed away, and it was just said to be a sudden illness. And it's just to explain why it affected me, growing up, being a nerd where I'm from wasn't really it wasn't really supported, all right? It wasn't very common. But with people like InControl, what they made it for me, or people like me, they made it possible to play games and it be cool. They made it possible to play games professionally and that be considered cool. And I'm trying to look for a specific... okay, so this is the first time I ever learned of InControl. Mr. Geoff. This is the first time I ever learned of him. Look at him compared to how you've probably seen him now as a commentator, and all of that stuff, like more recently, I should say. Rest in peace, by the way. But this is significant for me, and I wanted to bring it up because, I don't know, people like him really helped normalize gaming, I thought. And he was a big proponent for esports very early on. He was a big proponent in StarCraft esports. He was a commentator for them. He ran the Shoutcast tournament with Total Biscuit. He did a lot of good for the community of StarCraft. And as a StarCraft fan, I just figured that, I should say something about that. And man, he's been playing video games forever. Like, I can tell you guys some more stories about InControl. One time I went to PAX Prime, I believe it was, and InControl was there. This was way back when. Was playing anybody who would play. And essentially, it was like a StarCraft 1v1 versus a pro versus Joe kind of thing. And I remember, he was so cool in the sense that he was just relaxed. Like, he was not one of those pro gamers who seems very unapproachable or something. He was cool. He was asking everybody if they'd like to play, kind of a jovial shit talking and stuff like that. And I thought that whenever I would go watch him play, he'd play super serious and I remember just watching, first off, the speed at which he played was just incredible. He was a great player, Protoss player, by the way, which was very unique in StarCraft 2. And I remember I was watching him play, and this guy wasn't taking it serious. Like, maybe another pro would want to go in and have their undefeated record because the winner, I think, won a graphics card. Well, they're trying to give at least some product away. So, you could see that InControl was having some fun with it, and he was doing, mothership rushes and, probe rushes and just, the most silly rushes you could think of in StarCraft just because, he was having a good time, and he was making it fun for everybody there, so... It's just crazy to think that you can have 2 weeks of travel booked, and then all of a sudden, boom, something sudden like that can take you away. So anyway, not to make this podcast any more depressing than it already has been. I just thought that I'd get that out of the way because, InControl, man, he meant a lot to me. He was a cool guy. I appreciate his content. Sorry, I'm a little bit emotional because he was always really nice. Yeah, sorry. Whew. All right. I'm glad we got that out of the way first. What did I have here? Looks like a tweet. Oh, okay. So in some other esports news, and you can thank people like InControl for stuff like this, but check it out. Apparently, the most recent international for 2019 is going to be over $30 million USD. This now makes it the largest prize pool for any single tournament in the history of esports. This is just incredible. I'm just so happy to see this. Like, I love esports. I love supporting it. I think that those guys go through insane amounts of training and skill perfection and things like that. That doesn't go heralded enough, I guess. And that's starting to change. Obviously, the internet's become more prevalent, gaming's more prevalent, and esports is more prevalent. And it's just good to see like a big tournament like this. It's going to do big numbers. That just goes without saying. That's why it's, you know, this much money, right? I mean, let's be honest. Like, the way that Dota and Valve handle their crowdfunding for esports is, frankly speaking, the way I think it kind of has to be done if you want to do it organically, which is like, you can't just inject a shit ton of money from the company into the game and then just be like, this is an esport, because that's not really how sports work. If you think about it, sports have an audience. They have to have an audience. Each team makes money off of, you know, their audience, if you will, and then the whole league makes money off of it as a whole. With Valve and by contrast, a game like, or a company like Blizzard and Overwatch, the problem with that scene that I have versus this sort of esports scene, and we don't get to talk about esports enough here, but I think that's just because I haven't found a way to bring it up with you guys, because if you can't tell, I love esports. I love gaming, I love MMOs, but I love esports as well. Anyway, so crowdfunding, the way that works, in contrast to, say, how Blizzard worked, is Blizzard was like, all right, here's the esports scene, here's the money, I hope there's an audience. That's what Blizzard likes to do with esports. Whereas, you know, Valve has always kind of had the stance of, well, we're going to allow the community to organize shit like this. We'll give them the tools. We'll give them the API to mess with, the ability to make custom servers. We'll give them that access. And if you guys do that, and that gets supported enough, then sure, we'll increase the prize pool, or sure, we'll have more tournaments or whatever else. But I think the difference is essentially that one is based on an audience, and the other one is based on achieving an audience. Which, the reason why I'm talking about Blizzard is because they've had a number of problems with Overwatch and making Overwatch work as an esport, but also just a game in general. And that's why, you know, this recent news came out that apparently Blizzard is going to be introducing a role queue. And this is supposed to be pretty significant, because if you've ever played ranked games before, maybe a MOBA or something along the lines of that, then you've probably experienced a role queue now. And a role queue is essentially like, if you wanted to play a DPS, a support, or a tank, then you could just queue as that role, which will lock you into playing those certain characters. This kind of existed before, but it was more of like a group system where you would have to group with other people and things like that. This is an actual queue. Now, the reason why I'm showing this is, first off, Overwatch is a multiplayer game, and I cover multiplayer games. I also played Overwatch religiously before it launched and then after it launched, so I had a lot of history with the game, and that's why I talk about it a lot in my other Death of a Game videos surrounding games like Lawbreakers and Global Agenda and what else have I talked? No, there's one other video. Oh, well, the one that I'm working on right now, Quake Champions. And Gotham City Imposters. I think a little bit of that as well. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so apparently they're doing a role queue, and this is supposed to alleviate some of the problems that they were having with people essentially playing whatever the hell they want and teams not being balanced in ranked play. And that was a big problem that I experienced trying to go back to the game and play. Is, you know, once you get to like a high plat, low diamond, it starts to become to the point to where if I can't carry, then I just lose. And it's just like, it's a bit silly, you know, playing as a DPS when you don't know if you're going to have like 5 other DPS players. And then you're like, okay, well, I guess I could play the healer. But the problem with me playing the healer is that I'm the best DPS. And then the problem you run into is that one. You can change mid-game. Unlike in League of Legends, you can't change your character. That's another aspect as well. So people could have a good team comp and then all of a sudden just decide to change it. But anyway, I thought it was interesting to point this out. And it's sort of relevant to what we were discussing just a little bit earlier, because Blizzard is sort of realizing kind of through trial and error, really, which is just strange that a company of that size would want to learn through trial and error. But they're learning that maybe you can't just force an esport right away. And they're also learning that maybe we actually need to do something about the competitive integrity of our game if it's going to continue to be successful, because we're kind of basing it around being an esport. If it's not successful as an esport, then it might not be successful. That's sort of the same mentality that Epic, I should say, id Software had about Quake Champions as well. Like, that was from the horse's mouth. the lead developer on Quake Champions, said sort of the same thing. Is I don't know, for some reason during this time period, like 2015 through 2019, a lot of shooters have had this idea that you have to make it as an esport. And if you make it as an esport, it's going to make you a successful game. But it's just strange because it's like, these people like not remember like Shoot Mania and like a bunch of these other games that were constructed to be esports but never really took off. Like, you can have a game that's damn good as an esport. Doesn't mean it's going to have a casual audience. And it doesn't mean it's going to attract a casual audience, because just because they watch high-level players doesn't mean they're instantly going to watch it, or sorry, instantly going to like it, or instantly going to want to just play. Oh, wow, this guy's really good. I want to play the game. It's like if the game doesn't look fun to them, or it looks too intimidating, and that's an aspect that you see in a lot of games like chess, for example. A lot of people will watch chess, but why won't they play chess? Well, frankly speaking, it's a lot more fun to watch, because when you play, you realize kind of how a lot more confined it is, and frankly speaking, way more punishing. Because it's cool to watch somebody else make a blunder, but when you make the blunder yourself and then you got to play out the game, it's kind of like, yeah, chess is one of those games that first glance I think scares a lot of people, but it's sort of one of those things, once you get more exposure to it, you realize it's like, it's not that complicated, right? I say that as I get shit on by like 1,600 ELO players on chess.com. Yeah, and Heroes of the Storm, that's a good point, Cyancorp. Heroes of the Storm is another example to bring up with Blizzard, and that's sort of the problem that I'm trying to illustrate here, is that, like, I know I brought up the roll queue thing kind of like, it seemed like random to bring it up, but it's not. It's because, you know, I think that Overwatch has been struggling. Heroes of the Storm obviously has been struggling. That esports scene is pretty much dead, and then you get news like this coming out about Blizzard. So it's like, I'm not just like, you know, creating a whole lot of nonsense out of nowhere. Where there's smoke, there is some kind of fire, I should say. And if you look at this, it's like Frank Pierce just left the company. One of the founders, who's been with the company for over 28 years, founded the company with Alan Brack. And I mean, well, a lot of the other original OGs. This means that, well, between him, Mike Morhaime, what's the other guy, Rob Pardo, the vast majority of the original talent has left Blizzard. The vast majority of the original talent just founding the company, not just behind WoW, but founding the actual company, is leaving. And people are pointing out that this is all happening in the span of just 2 to 3 years. I mean, we've only seen these big drops in the span of 2 to 3 years. So what that tells me, or at least allows me to speculate, since I don't know for sure, the speculation, or at least my hunch, my intuition tells me that they're leaving because after this acquisition of Activision, and Activision Blizzard becoming more and more a thing, and not Blizzard Activision or Blizzard on its own separate entity, I think it's becoming more painfully obvious to these big wigs that they could just cash out so they don't have to deal with all of the drama, or maybe like the bastardization of their company, because essentially most of them have a fraction of the same power they used to have. So it's almost like many of them will still have the same positions, but yet they're still not as powerful as they were before, because now they have this other company that they have to answer to. I think that's very unattractive to a lot of companies, or sorry, a lot of OG founders, whenever a big player comes in and basically starts to say like, your opinion doesn't matter as much as it used to, even though you kind of founded this company and the company is sort of based onto you in some way, or based from you in some way. It looks like Blizzard is just losing a lot of its original talent, and this just reminds me of BioWare. And look at what BioWare went to create whenever it started to lose more and more talent. I mean, it had games like Mass Effect Andromeda, and it had Anthem, and those are two lackluster games. Blizzard obviously didn't do the best for its stock portfolio, it basically, long story short, its stock took a hit whenever it announced Diablo Immortal on the phones, and the whole you don't have phones. Yeah, so that pissed people off. But so Blizzard's stock, I guess I would say, in public has been taking a hit, as well as behind the scenes, as a corporation has been taking a hit. The thing that I want to point out now is, more than ever have I seen WoW in a vulnerable state. More than ever have I seen WoW in a state now where people are trying to punch at it. And when I mean punch at it, I don't just mean like, we're going to be a WoW killer. I don't mean that. I mean, games like Final Fantasy 14 basically saying, well, you're worse than us. We're a better version than you. We're a better version of you than you. Elder Scrolls is saying the same thing, you know. And I think this is the first time I've really started to see that. Yes, fanboys have always said, oh, my game's better than yours. But man, it's like you just go to the MMORPG subreddit or just read any forum and it's like, WoW is looking pretty vulnerable. And I think that's what makes this whole Classic thing very interesting. It's Classic is launching in less than, 40 days. And that's going to obviously change their stock, obviously going to change the reception for Blizzard, the audience, the popularity of the game. It's going to blow up. There's going to be a lot of change that's going to be coming with that. So even if any of you guys aren't interested in playing Classic WoW, I would recommend just watching the story or just watching my podcast, really. Shameless plug, but I'm going to be covering the whole story as it unfolds, and I think it's going to be very interesting just to see, is it going to make maybe Blizzard change some of their ways in some ways? Will they maybe have more faith in MMOs in the future? Or is this kind of ship already sinking? And this is just like a last ditch effort to maybe capitalize on some nostalgia and hopefully just to make some money, basically. Is this just a marketing thing? Or is this a conscious design decision that are we actually trying to reevaluate our game? Or is there something that we can build off of this? Because I think it's very foolish to assume that they don't know what old school RuneScape does with their game, or Jagex does with their game. Well, not Jagex anymore. Now it's a Chinese holding company, I think, right? Or was it? No, it's an American investment company that owns Jagex now. Sorry, we talked about that last week on the podcast. But it's like, you're telling me the big wigs at Blizzard or behind WoW have never heard of RuneScape. They don't know what old school RuneScape is currently doing. It's like, that's what I'm just curious about. Is they're not outright saying they won't do it. In fact, I believe Ion and also Omar, both devs from Blizzard, with WoW specifically, both said that it's possible in the future that they could do future content, new content for WoW. That doesn't really mean a whole lot because it's just like, maybe we'd do it. It's not a confirmation. But I'm just saying, I think I'm just curious to see when they're going to take a stance. When is Blizzard going to say, we're just going to kind of keep this for now, or we're going to do this with that? I think right now they haven't been saying anything, and this is kind of weird because you don't see that a lot whenever a game's about to launch, right? Or a server's about to launch, but it's almost like they're holding their cards to their chest because they themselves don't even know what to expect. I mean, if you think about how WoW Classic got started in the first place, it was basically by the community forcing it to happen. They had to force Blizzard to realize that the game that they were currently running was not the same game that many people enjoyed originally. And also, many people were still playing that original game. They were still playing that classic WoW. And so they just wanted an official server version, of course, because an official server version is always going to get more people playing because, well, there's not going to be as many problems of nepotism or just greed and donation gear and corruption and all of that other good stuff. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts about this whole thing. They're losing a lot of key members at Blizzard, but with WoW Classic on the horizon in just under 2 months, under 2 months, by 2 weeks actually, but basically less than 40 days, right? A month and a half. A month and a half they're away from this big launch. There's still no news of an RP PvP server, nor no announcement of it. There's no news of what servers are going to be launched. We don't even know what servers are going to be launched. I have never seen an MMO launch more up in the air coming from such a big AAA company than I have seen with WoW Classic's launch so far. It's just they canceled their stress test recently as well. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, you canceled the stress test. So does that mean launch is still going? Is that a go ahead? Are we still okay in that respect? Or does that mean that's going to get pushed back as well? It's hard to see that ever as being a good thing, right? Let me change some of my, we're doing it live, so changing my little title screen. There we go. Oh, one. Old talent being replaced with newer people isn't necessarily that bad as long as the new people have a good understanding of what made the predecessors great. Yeah, and I think that's a hard thing to do. In fact, I was just talking about that. It's very hard to maintain a culture in something. Like after you've had like multiple generations pass through it, it's obviously very hard to maintain a culture. My problem with them losing some of these key players is not that they can't get new talent. Actually, it has nothing to do with it. I would say it's more because there's a reason that the old talent is leaving. And that to me tells me that it's either because their hands are tied, they can't do what they want to do, or they're being kind of pushed out. And that happens a lot. I mean, this happened to Richard Garriott, the guy who coined the term MMO. I mean, he was literally pushed out of his own company. Like, I think this happens more than people realize. That sometimes behind the closed doors, sometimes behind the scenes, a big publisher just tells you, or your boss tells you, hey, either quit or we're going to fire you. So it's like, I don't want to say that that's what this is, but I'm just saying you can't throw that out of the realm of possibility. Mountain Blade 2 sadly seems to be heading in that direction, for example. I feel like minigames try to be esports to forget to make something that's actually fun and interesting. What's not fun and interesting about Mountain Blade, out of curiosity? You think because they're testing like the multiplayer first or something? I think they're testing that first because it's harder to test and they need more information. Game's got to be fun first. If it has a high skill ceiling, I say it'll probably form an esport. Yeah, and that's the thing is like you have to have a wait and see mentality. I know it sounds annoying. I used to be an aspiring esport kid. All right, I tried to be a pro gamer multiple times. I kind of did it sometimes, but not enough to pay the bills. Point being is, that's like really cool and awesome to want to be a pro at whatever you do, right? A pro gamer. That's really a great goal. However, going into a game without even knowing if there's anything that's promised in that respect, there's no security, is just silly. And I've done it so many times, so I can speak from experience. With Guild Wars 2, I poured so much of my time and effort into that game because I saw it as, this is Guild Wars 1 on steroids. If I can get big in this esports scene, I can make money. Like, this is going to be awesome. I love MMOs. That's how I saw it, right? And then it actually came out. And then they kept pushing things back a year, and it took years before they got certain cues and things like that. It took a year before they got spectator mode. It's just like there was certain things that no matter what, you can't go into a game thinking like, oh, it's going to be an esport right away and the competitive scene is just going to thrive. It's like, it's never really worked like that. Like, it really hasn't. And sometimes you can have an esports scene early on, and that almost can like warp your perspective. I've seen that before as well. The big part is here they put a specific 6v6 mode. Oh, that captain mode or whatever. I mean, I thought captain mode looked kind of cool because it's like different ways of ordering your troops and commanding the battlefield. Hey, what's up, Sacriladius? In fact, they have actually said that they're not putting any real emphasis on non-competitive game modes with high player counts. Oh, skirmish mode. So captain mode's, I think, the one where you're ordering your troops around. I know there's a bunch of new modes and things like that. All right, so let's see what else we have. Oh, so actually it looks like I'm done with my current gaming news that I wanted to get to this week. I didn't mention that we have a MMO Roundtable weekly topic, as we always will now, from now on. And that topic that I wanted to get to today, and actually shortly, so if you could join me in the podcast lobby, if any of you would like to join in on the weekly topic of the week, redundant, but you get my point. If you'd like to join in on discussing that particular topic, just join my Discord. There is the podcast lobby channel. We will all raise our hands, proverbially, in chat, and take turns answering the question. The weekly question is going to be, what is your opinion of story-focused MMORPGs? Do they have a place in the genre? Explain. So explain is always going to be on there. So I'm going to post that in chat just so people know what the question is. I'm also going to post it again in the MMO Roundtable just in case everybody's following it properly. But yeah, so the question of the week is, and remember, you have a little bit of time to think about this. I'm not immediately going to go to the roundtable. I wanted to talk about something first as a way of kind of like giving you guys enough time to show up. Okay, so use now as the opportunity to join the podcast lobby if you'd like to join in on this weekly MMO Roundtable discussion about what is your opinion of story-focused MMORPGs. But one thing I wanted to get to before then is actually, I saw that Chronicles of Elyria had at least what was described on Reddit as a big update. So I was excited to see kind of what the update was about. And you know, it's sad. Apparently the update is just maps. You know, it's nice. They're big, large maps. You can download them. They're very detailed and stuff. It's cool. But I guess the reason why I'm even talking about this is, why is this even being mentioned as like some big update? Like, why are people even posting this on Reddit? It just shows you like how desperate we are as MMO fans to cling to whatever game we want to support, just like the old days. It's almost like things haven't changed. For you old timers who've been there in the beginning, you remember people, you know, jumping on the bandwagon. It's almost like things are the same, except now people's money is invested into these games. So it's almost like the fandom is even more insane. But I scrolled through some of the comments because sometimes I just like to observe things. And this one kind of cracked me up right here. And it's like this guy's response. Now that's what I'm talking about. The wait was long, but damn, is it a sexy payoff. And it's like so much positive reinforcement. I guess, you know, that's common in these forums because most of these people have spent money and want the game to do well. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being positive, but I'm just saying Chronicles of Elyria has had next to no gameplay shown, right? They've shown a little bit of parkour gameplay. I've seen nothing massive shown, not a single thing massive shown with multiple players, with a bunch of interactions. I've seen nothing of the sort. And yet, we're still getting excited about just like maps. Like, what happened to our standards, I guess? I don't know. Am I being unreasonable here? I'm just trying to understand why we go from having these high expectations and we rail on things like Star Citizen. And then we have games like Chronicles of Elyria who have basically less gameplay than alpha games that are made by teams with way less money and way less resources. That's how unfinished the game is. And it's just like, you know, I know Card is probably in agreement with me, but it's always interesting when people bandwagon hate on Star Citizen and yet ignore projects like Chronicles of Elyria, where it's like, did you guys even fund the game yet? We don't know that. Why aren't we seeing any significant level of gameplay at this point, right? Alpha? At what point does that no longer be a good excuse? Oh, so sorry. For you guys who don't know about Chronicles of Elyria, I kind of assume you guys watch most of my videos. Chronicles of Elyria, I'll show you the only gameplay really that exists for this game, but Chronicles of Elyria is a game that has a very unique life and death system where you can die and then you have to be reborn as another character. In fact, here's a quick little hype video. Let's get hyped.
For Chronicles of Elyria members. Persistent World role-playing game aims to address
I don't talk that slow, do I, guys?
Shortcomings in today's MMOs. There's a lot of information here, guys. I'm trying to go as fast as possible. They are using the Unreal Engine. However, they say they also use the, quote, Soulborn engine, which collects server-side logic and services.
Okay, here's the gameplay. Look at the frame drops.
They're looking at adding.
I don't see anybody on the streets. Oh, sorry, I'm not showing you guys this. I hate myself.
They say they also use the, quote, Soulborn engine, which collects server-side.
Here's what you missed. You missed a guy panning around his character, some frame drops.
They're looking at adding.
I saw some light diffuse there. That's cool. That's a cool little feature. You see, like, you can see like the light diffusion here.
They're looking at.
But here's what my point is. Where is like anybody in the world? Like, most of these gameplay trailers, these yet to launch MMO show, just crack me up because it's like, I'm sorry guys, But does anybody actually
Pictured
care about
as,
this
quote,
kind of gameplay? Like,
tribes.
I'm
Not
being
much race
serious
choice,
here.
it
I'm not trying to
seems.
be mean.
Humans
I'm
with
being
different
serious.
characteristics,
Does
like
anybody really
size
care
and
about
shape.
this
By
kind
the
of
way, you
gameplay?
might
Because I
get a
guess
feel
it's
on
kind of
what I think about
useful.
the
You
game
can see
based
them like
on
running
my
around
sarcasm,
and
but
looking at
we'll see.
some poorly
Rather
textured
than being grindy and repetitive, Chronicles
areas
wants to
because it's
focus on
alpha.
players' meaningful
Okay,
choices about the role they
but
play
I guess
in
just
the
what's the
world.
point?
Their choices in turn
This
have
doesn't look like
meaningful
an MMO to
consequences
me.
on those around them.
I don't
Kinda sounds
understand
like
what it
a
is about
roguelike
MMOs
in a way.
advertising themselves
You'll
like
have
not looking
other
like
mechanics. They didn't
MMOs.
really go into detail as far as I'm aware. Lives or souls will cost between $20 and $40 each. There will be a box cost for the game as well. So TLDR, there's going to be a box cost. You got to buy the game. There's no subscription, and then you have to pay between $20 and $40 for every soul.
Yeah, I talked about this in my Kickstarter
Their
video.
plans for servers. Get this shit, guys. Their plans for servers, let me know if this reminds you of anything. Their plans for servers is to push the limits on the number of players available on a single server. As a result, it's their goal to keep the number of servers small. There will only be 4 regional servers: NA West, NA East, EU, and Oceanic.
I'm sorry, dude. Oh, I hate being the guy who kills all the hype. Okay? I like hype. But did anybody else notice what he said there? He said there's only going to be like these certain regional servers. Okay. So like 4 servers, let's say. And they're pushing the size or amount of players capable on each of those servers. That's awesome. That's so cool. I love that. That's what MMOs to me are about, right? A big persistent world. But they haven't shown anything to show that they could even do even a fraction of that. I mean, I don't even think I've seen another player on the screen with another player before. So I'm just trying to figure out, how could you take that claim seriously? I just don't get how you could take that claim seriously. They've, based on the information currently, don't just take people's words for it. Don't just listen to Chronicles of Elyria trying to sell you their backer pledges or their founder packs or whatever. And I'm not just trying to pick on them, all right? This is just a specific example that I'm going into here, but it's just like, you don't really know if that's like an accurate statement or if they could even do anything close to that. And that's sort of the thing that I tried to tell people in my Kickstarter video, is just whatever they say, take them at their word. Like, take them seriously. Because what you're going to find is that a lot of the time, there's a lot of false promises that they could never really satisfy. And if they can't satisfy it, at least even just in show, like showing me some like tech demo of a bunch of dudes. Okay, so here's 2 dudes on the screen, but is that an NPC or what? You know? How are they going to push the boundaries of how many players are allowed on the same server when all the gameplay showed in 2019 that I've seen is just running around in a big empty world? Again, I hate to be the killer of hype. I hate to be that person who just seems to rail on shit. But it's like, I'm struggling to find what's like exciting about that. Did I miss some Fedora tips? No Shay, thank you for the sub. I think that's how I pronounce it. Welcome to the Nor Club. Here's your Fedora tip. Then also, I had another one before that. Sorry guys, I'm on a roll today. I've got my my medical CBD. I'm feeling good. Feeling healthy. Plastic Wasted. Oh, hey Plastic. Welcome to the Nor Club. Here's your la tip. That's why I'm excited for Dual Universe. They had a tech demo with 1,000 characters. And let's go look at Dual Universe, because I love looking at games in progress that can actually show me something resembling what they are promising. I'm not saying you need to show me everything right now. I get that. Like, you don't have the money. These games take massive amounts to develop. I know, I'm very keenly aware of that. I chronicle them all the time. But I want to see some semblance that what you're trying to communicate, that you're trying to accomplish with your game, is actually possible. It's something you could actually do. And that's actually what I like seeing in Dual Universe, is in Dual Universe, it wants to be Star Citizen space engineers, if that makes sense. Like, it's not just trying to be this contained world or just some big sandbox. It's trying to be like the kind of sci-fi world where you could literally create anything. And I've never seen a current MMO that has more customization and more world building than dual universe. You can terraform, you can build stations, you can build ships, you can customize your own ships and build them the way that you want to build them. You can build space stations and landing pads and just like crazy things like that. These are the kind of games that I like to hype and like to talk about because, again, I'm seeing some semblance of reality here. Like, I've seen people play the game. I've seen people mess around with it and showcase the building and things like that. Like, if you look at this, like, this is far more than anything we've seen. Where's that? This is far more than anything we've seen with the previous Chronicles of Elyria I was just showcasing. This, like, okay, so this is not a gameplay video? I thought this was a gameplay video. Here we go. This is far more actual, relatable, observable features than we've seen from just about any of the other Kickstarter MMOs currently out there. I think Dual Universe does deserve a lot of credit in that respect. Because, I mean, just look at this. Like, this is going to be the future, guys. Like, I'm not going to say that this game's going to be great, but I'm just saying, just based on what they're able to showcase so far, that is what you should be hyped about. You should be hyped about actual features that are shown to you, that you can actually play, that you can actually affect. Because otherwise, it's just a bunch of just window dressing. It's a bunch of marketing. It's a bunch of bullshit, frankly speaking. But look at this. Like, he has a programming board, and he's literally creating things. Let's see if we can get them to create something cool. I mean, just look at this. They're on some random planet, just landing on some random planet. You think about this in an MMO, this with 1,000 players, and I mean, you are rewriting what it means to be a sandbox MMO. You are pushing the boundaries past what was possibly, or what was previously thought possible. But anyway. Have you seen the Ashes of Creation oral caravan video? I don't think I have, actually. Let me look that up. Volumetric clouds. What do you think about AoC dev diary? Is that what they're talking about here? Let me get that on screen. We're doing a lot of reaction stuff today, aren't we? All right, so it looks like in chat so far we've only got 4 in the podcast lobby, so I'm gonna go ahead and start it with that. But before I do that really quickly, let's just watch this video. But does it have a 210 million long, insanely luxurious space shot? I mean, couldn't you create one conceivably? And shit, we could create one with a giant ass bridge where you can like see down. I'm just kidding. Obviously, I'm not a builder myself, but I love seeing my own ideas brought to creation. I'd love to like hire a team of builders. That'd be awesome. A mayoral caravan system. Okay.
Trying to garner extra resources by doing a caravan quest.
That's kind of like
Developing
Arcade.
a city is no small process.
With the idea of caravans and
It
things like
requires a lot
that.
of resources and the aid of a lot of
I like
different
this.
players.
This is a good idea. This is going to
Caravan
create a
system
lot
is
of
way
content for
players to
them.
participate in driving that trade between
I liked it in
NPCs that
Arcade
exist
as
in
well.
the world
I
to
just thought that
ensure
the
your
problem in
node
Arcade for me was that it was so simplistic. And that's my fear in this as well, is like what's the end game? Is it just like you go here, get this resource, people can attack you and steal it from you or not? Because that's kind of how it was in Arcade. There needs to be more like depth to that, I think.
over the past decade or so, I've noticed that that's slowly been creeping out of the calculus for player interactions in the game. Risk versus reward, it's all just become reward for the most part. And the caravan system really allows the player to take a risk, and in exchange, depending on the size of that risk, they get an equitable reward. The caravan system allows for that to exist. By moving
I agree with
goods
that.
can be lost during that transit, it becomes a very dangerous activity, one that requires the support of a lot of your friends or guilds or fellow citizens.
Whoa,
to make sure
a
that those
giant
goods make it to the
mushroom that attacks you?
There's really
I like
so
that.
much that goes into creating
Like that
action
variety.
fiction. It is by far probably the most ambitious project that I've ever seen, both both as a player and now as being part of the development process, there's really so many moving pieces. And
I think Star Citizen is that. Come on, let's be honest.
Watching the players experience all of these different systems has choices involved.
This video gets way more marks than anything that Ashes of Creation has shown thus far. Looks far more impressive than anything I've seen from Chronicles of Elyria, Profall, and just in my and I would also say Pantheon. In my opinion, though, the problem with that is that there's two things you have to be careful with Ashes of Creation. One, that weird BR thing that they did, which kind of like, that has some people a little bit suspicious. Actually, there's a couple things. The my.com publishing, that obviously has people very worried. The other thing that I'm worried about is, and this isn't said enough, is can anybody tell me what their current funding is? Like, in fact, I'll utilize you detectives in chat. Can anybody find out what Ashes of Creation's current funding is? Is it listed on their website? Could you find it anywhere publicly? Because I tried and I couldn't find it. I'm usually pretty good at finding things. I couldn't find anything about it. And that has me worried. I don't like when these Kickstarter projects or crowdfunded projects don't have easily like accessible records of how much money they're raising, how much money they're currently at, how much money is being put in from outside investors or anything of this of the note. But we just don't know. We don't know how much money in totality is in Ashes of Creation. We don't know about their budgeting. And that kind of has me worried about it. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the MMO Roundtable segment. I'm going to go ahead and join the podcast lobby and get started answering our weekly topic. Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey.
Yo.
Hello. Hello.
Alrighty, so this week's question, which I know everyone's probably had a chance to see already or think about, is what is your opinion of the story-focused MMORPGs? And do they have a place in the genre? And so if everyone in the MMO Roundtable Discord section can just X up or put something in chat so you can raise your hand to go first. So we can just make it a little bit orderly, and then after everybody has their chance going, we can open up the floor to have any agreements, disagreements, and the like, and then see how chat is taking it all in. Maybe if they disagree or agree. So it looks like first we have Plastic Waste, so I'll let her go first.
So, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. And, well, what is my opinion of story-focused MMORPGs? First of all, I like them. I like them because I like stories, and stories plus huge open world environment gives me a lot of freedom to roleplay. I like to have a bunch of little quests that enrich the world and help me to enrich the life of a character that I am currently role-playing for by myself in my head. It sounds a little bit lonely, but hey. And here you might be already thinking, why not play a single-player game like Skyrim? At least there aren't like 300 other Dragonborns running around. And there are two big reasons why I love the idea of story-driven MMORPG and why I do think that they have a place in a genre instead of just playing a single-player game. The first reason is that the lore and the world become bigger and the game does not just die like most single-player games do. Or at least it lives longer than most single-player games, because MMOs do die after all. Now you might think, wait, Skyrim is well alive until this day because of the modding community, and that is true. It is an exception though. Other games I loved way more are not that lucky, like Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning. And the second reason is that story-driven MMOs are great for interesting community events. In my mind, I always come back to opening of the gates of Ankarash. Sorry for my pronunciation. The lore behind it is something you could get from a single-player game. The lore is not something very special, right? But the cooperation and the feeling of being a part of an actual living community is something I doubt I could get from any of my single player games. That kind of a thing gives you a feeling of accomplishment bigger than being the commander and a dragon slayer in Guild Wars 2. So, thus for me, story-driven MMOs are perfect because I love stories and I love being a part of a community. And that's why I'm so excited for Classic, of course. And after all, I love the lore of World of Warcraft, and I just want to roleplay a normal dude that got swept up in the current of events. I just wish that all the story-driven MMOs didn't force you to be the chosen one and the only hero, just like everyone else. And yeah, that would be it for me.
All right. So before I explain my argument, I have to say that I have a bias against story-based MMORPGs because I don't actually like them very much. And basically, the reason why, like, my main argument is that they often uh, the balance between like gameplay and story, like they don't often hit it right. Like very often, like there's too much story and not enough gameplay, or like I feel like the gameplay doesn't properly reflect the story in many cases. Also, Plastic Waste mentioned the opening of the gates of Anchorage, and that's like one of the like very few exceptions that I consider like proper implementations of story-based like MMORPGs. But sadly, like there's like very few cases like that. Like they're like the exception, not the norm. Next person.
Okay.
Uh,
I'll go
go.
next. Oh, wait, I'm echoing on your mic, I think. But so answer the question. What is your opinion of story-focused MMORPGs? I'm gonna split hairs a little bit between where Plastic and OSI are at. I have some positive experiences with them. I enjoyed my experience playing SWOTOR's class storylines. You know, the 6 that I've played to max level. I enjoyed those. I also enjoyed the Secret Worlds story. I enjoyed the contained stories, and Star Wars Galaxies is like later on flashpoints or whatever they called them back then. And then what Guild Wars 1, I love how prophecy changes the game and the world changes and things like that. But one thing I'll mention that I think was a little bit different between the two of your comments was that when you talk about story, it's like you almost have to be specific with what you mean. You have to be like, do you mean a single player kind of style story with instances and things of that nature? Or do you mean more of an open-ended kind of story? Because I would argue that, Encourage and things like that are more open-ended kind of story. They're open for interpretation of other people's kind of like the recounts of the events, but they give you some level of contained story, of course, because it's got lore and things like that. But I think that's one cool thing about an event like that, a public event of sorts, is that you can actually involve the community and make it part of the story. The problem, I think, though, of that versus, say, for example, like SWOTOR, that I use as an example that I actually enjoyed, was that in SWOTOR, doing the story doesn't make me want to play with anybody else. In fact, and I've said this before, I've beaten the game many times, and I did a very specific playthrough on my Imperial agent, where I specifically roleplayed that I was like some Imperial loyalist, so I never talked to anybody. I never talked to anybody, and I was always just like, in the name of the Empire. Like, that was just my character. And I got by doing that. And I mentioned that because for me, a good story game, or a good story MMO, I should specify, wouldn't allow me to just like not interact with other players, because I just think that's kind of why I presented the question in the first place. Is with story MMORPGs, I can't help but feel like unless you're specific with single player style story or open world style story, it makes a big difference, because with that single player style story, I can't help but say it's just diametrically like opposed to what it means to be an MMO. That's just my opinion. Like, I see it as, you're making me have this private instance. You're essentially making it to where I can't even group with the majority of, like, most people who do storylines in SWTOR don't group with people because it's so easy. But here's the silly thing. You actually used to group. Even just to do main quests. In fact, many of my friends early on in SWTOR needed help leveling because the game was actually difficult. But once again, it goes back to, once you change difficulty, you also ruin the story. And that's a problem with contained stories, in my opinion, and that's my biggest problem with SWTOR. Why, as you can tell, it gets me fired up, because it's just like, they had this super contained storyline, this instant storyline, but then they just ruined the balance to it. So it's just like, I can't even take it seriously because you guys don't take it seriously. But if you guys actually took the balancing seriously, then maybe I would actually be able to take your story seriously. But like, a perfect example is whenever you go to fight a boss, everyone in SWTOR in the story is like, oh my god, this guy's the biggest, strongest, baddest guy in the town. You better be careful. He's going to take you out. And in some of the responses, sometimes you can even say like, oh, I'm so scared. Like, wow, you're so tough. Don't hurt me. But then you like whip the dude like 3 times with your lightsaber and he just falls over and you're just like, does anyone else notice this? Like, that was my reaction whenever I was playing through the story again for like, you know, the billionth time, was just like, does anybody else notice this? That everybody's telling me that this guy's really tough, and then I can just literally, as I did on stream, just close my eyes and win boss fights. So I think, again, that goes back to single player style story. I don't think it should be a main focus in a MMORPG. Should instance content and single player content be allowed in MMOs? Of course. Like, I'm totally okay with doing adventures and things like ESO does as well. I'm okay with that kind of content, period. I'm not okay with it being a big focus because it's very, very expensive to make, and therefore it's going to affect other ways of your game or other aspects of your game. Just look at SWTOR. That game without its story, I mean, it literally just falls apart. the wagon doesn't even keep going. You know, the wheels just fall right off because it needs that. But because it needs that, that limits it so much because it's so stuck waiting on the next content update to have story. I think open-ended story allows for that to be kind of somewhat alleviated because you can do it like Asheron's Call did it, where every month you have a story update or multiple story updates where this little thing happens. You have a quest update here. And so it's like everyone can quest at their own pace. You have a whole month to like get that quest done, but then you can progress to like the next thing and the next thing and then the next thing. And I think that more iterative and more open-ended story, I'm totally cool with that. Like Plastic was saying, like, I think that story does absolutely have a place in MMOs. I just think that the problem is that you have to look at the balance between what's considered story that makes sense in a MMO and what's considered story that makes sense in a single player game. The problem is in the current generation, the current market, single player MMOs are a real thing, which is just strange to me. Like, I can't, and I know Osai, that's his perspective because we've talked about this before together, but I just can't really understand the single player MMOs because it's just like, for me, SWTOR, did I enjoy playing the game? Absolutely. But riddle me this, Batman. Would the game have been better if it just had none of the multiplayer aspects in it? I personally think so, with resounding colors. I think it would have been a much, much, much better game if it didn't have that dreaded hero engine that, by the way, it only got because it was an MMO. So you see my point is like, I think it would have been a much better game had they not have all of that shackles of trying to make it massive and online and multiplayer. So with single player MMOs like SWTOR, my opinion is absolutely, I don't think that those games, Star Trek Online as well, so let me be fair, but I don't think that those games really have a place in this market. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. If I can speak, in my personal experience, instance single player like adventures in an MMO are actually very annoying especially in ESO. I have seen many times how I'm supposed to go and kill a mob and specific boss, and when I arrive, there is another person that already did. So I actually think this kind of story discourages teamwork. It's not like, for example, in Vanilla WoW, when we used to be just units from Warcraft 3. So so every quest, even when it's story oriented, were encouraged to do in group. Sorry if my pronunciation is not good, but my English is not my maternal language. The thing is that instance questing used to be an immersion breaker, if you catch my meaning. It's I made the example of ESO specifically because it was like a point of inflection in my experience in MMOs. I know the lore of Elder Scrolls way to enjoy questing in the game. I mean, after several hours of questing, so many contradictions with the lore I knew before from the RPGs, I decided just stop questing. I stopped questing and did more sandbox oriented activities. I gather materials to sell in the guild trader. I engage in PvP at Zero Deal, etc. More teamwork oriented gameplay. And the fact is that I realized that it was much more immersive than my questing experience in MMOs, even more than, for example, in WoW. In WoW, I used to do mostly questing and raids. I wasn't much more for crafting or PvP. And when I realized that it was much more fun because I had more memories of my experiences with other players rather than the quests I did, when I returned to WoW, that was actually my first MMO. I focused in teamwork. I did more PvP actually in a private server that is about the Burning Crusade because it was my favorite expansion. For example, right now during this podcast, I am playing Shadowbane, and even though it's not story based, I have more fun in this game than when I was, for example, questing in WoW, questing in Rift. I remember the quest in Rift were actually interesting. I had fun, but during all my period up to level 50, I didn't encounter a single player which to share some spirit. Actually, in Rift, the only way you could do some stuff with other players was I don't remember the name, but it was I think it was Adventures. It's like an instance mode or go with other players and kill stuff. and over and over and over. It was the easiest way to level up after level 50. And once again, the quest is something that pushes you far from the rest of the community that is playing that game. So and now that actually someone mentioned his experience, her experience with Kingdoms of Amalur. It's a game I played this year actually, and I have more fun in those quests than those in MMOs, and that made me think on something that you said in a former podcast, that questing in MMOs was not as fun as it was in a single player game. So the quests should not be the main focus of an MMO. In my personal experience, that's actually true. It's like if your brain recognizes that when you're interacting with an empty-souled NPC, and when you are doing it with a real person, and finds a closer connection when you are interacting with other players, no? Because they are real persons like you. They are not predictable. And the closest to that experience I have had has not come from MMO NPCs. The closest to that has been, an NPCs that have been that close to experience with another player has been only in Dragon Age Origins. And it's not an MMO, no? It's actually an RPG. So I think that actually story focused MMOs are doomed to die slowly. And that's pretty much all I could say about the matter.
Hey, Card, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
You want to go ahead? I think he's done.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, got a few points have been covered indeed, and there's single player stories, as in focus on a single player, and there are stories. And topics is very much what is your opinion on a story focused MMORPG? Do they have a place in the genre? And I would say most certainly a story focused MMO has a lot of place. And I talked about it in the chat a while back on the Discord. It's like, actually, now looking back at the that first half of the first season of Sword Art Online, like they had a right idea there. Actually, like that's a story-based MMO with a overarching story where everybody partakes in the one story, which is how it should be for a MMO story. So it's like a story that everybody can experience in their own way, and they partake their own parts in that. I think if you'd like build your MMO around a system like that, I mean, you could literally take the basic core concept that they showed there, and you could make that into an MMO. It just will need some tweaks and balances and things like that. But I think if you give a couple of people a couple of months, they can come up with a really workable concept. So, do they have a place in the genre? I would say in that space, most certainly. And I think a game like that, it would not have perhaps very mass appeal. It would be a little bit more niche, but I think it would have actually a chance to create a very, very strong community around the game, which is in the end what we really want from playing MMOs. I mean, you want the interaction with people. Because if you don't want the interaction with people, then you will just play a single player game. And that's like, if you want to play a single player story, play a single player game. They are built for it. It's like, there you go. It's designed for it. It's going to work properly. It's going to look great. It's going to have a great story, and be done with it. If you want to play the MMO, well, here's the MMO. And the fact that you need like games like SOTOR and stuff, they are mixing those two together. I think it's like, yeah, the stories in SOTOR were really enjoyable, but as you said, it's just a crap MMO. So I think it's fairly safe that, saying single player as single player storylines in an MMO, they should just not be done. Now, there's of course a whole storyline, and they're like quests. Like, yeah, you can give a player a quest to say like, hey, I need you to go into that cave. This whatever stole something from me, retrieve it. And that could be a single player event. Like, you could arrive there, the guy gives you the quest, you go do that, and you come back with it. That's fine. But then make a whole storyline focused on your character. Because I think the other thing it will do is, if you keep that overarching story, it's like, yeah, we are not all the saviors of Azeroth, we are right now in World of Warcraft, but you're just one of the people that are trying to do the best for the world, or maybe you're one of the people that's trying to fight against the people that are doing the best for the world. So I think from that perspective, like, yeah, I really would like to, I mean, since I mentioned that in the chat, I've been thinking more and more about it. It's like, I would really like to see a story-focused MMO as in Sword Art Online, and how they build that. And just work from that core and add things to it. Because I really think it has a lot of promise. So, yeah. In conclusion, do they have a place in the genre? Hell yes. What's my opinion on them? Well, if you make it properly as a MMO, great. If you make them like SOTOR, just make a single-player game, please.
Yeah, because I do think that you brought up a good point, by the way, and everyone feel free to chime in now. But you brought up a good point about how there's a particular way that you can do it. And I think that maybe if at first glance people will take the negative things said about story MMOs as like, oh, we don't want it to work, period, or we don't want that, period. Actually, it's like you were saying, even a more contained kind of story game, if they could make it work to where you're a lot more intertwined with the other players and their kind of struggles, and sort of something closer to, I guess, what people like with Destiny and things like that. It's possible to tie people in and have some overarching story while still allowing for some sort of like difference in how you see your character. But the more over-relying story you rely on, which, by the way, every raid is going to have them, right? Because if you're going to spend all this money to make a raid, you're going to make it like the biggest, baddest, like coolest raid ever. Or at least that's what current games are doing. And so you'll be like, it's the big, bad monster destroyer guy. And that's the raid that you end up making. I think that maybe it would be better to have a game where, like Card was saying, you're sharing in the struggle with these other players. You're doing these story quests and things like that with them. But at the same time, you shouldn't be shoehorned in to having to be the best, most powerful guy. I just don't think that that is even necessarily wanted. I think it's something that they think that we want, but
The whole point, and why I brought up Sword Art Online, is like, a lot of those players, like in the anime, of course, they're like, you got this core group that was like struggling to keep on pushing. They kept on pushing, trying to get to the next levels. A lot of players just started to linger behind, and they started, like, whatever. We're just gonna be here and do what we want. I'm gonna become a smith. They're gonna focus on the crafting and things like that. And the way I saw, like, if you build that system, it's like you could even make it that, like, if as long as these planes are unlocked, you need to make them habitable so that the NPC factions also start to move in, and you can have like a whole supporting structure for the entire thing, and that way players of all sorts can find their home, because the PvPers could find a place there, because they, you can have factions that want to stop the progression for some reason or another.
right.
I mean, they're probably going to be rewards for it. They're going to be crafters. They're going to be explorers. They're going to be fighters.
Yeah, and
So many options.
Hey,
Uh,
is there actually any games that have done that, like having some narrative about like having like a game-wide objective where like you have to defeat some villain or something like that, and like the whole server has to work together to achieve it, and like like it actually has like a narrative story, and maybe when it's over, like you can just like restart it or something.
I mean,
Has this ever
Asheron's
been
Call is the
done?
only one I can think of that throughout most of its tenure as a MMO and the second game as well, it had a lot of story updates, and that's sort of the story that they would do. The story would be something would happen in the world, and that would slowly trickle out. The information would slowly trickle out. People would be like, because you know they'd have to figure it out. It wasn't just like go here and do this quest because it's too easy. So in that scenario, people could just solve it immediately, and then it's like your content updates every month. Just like in SWOTOR's case, the reason why I think the game hemorrhages so many players is there's just not enough content. There's not enough for players to keep doing once they're past the initial bit of content. Which is why Card and I always suggest, hey, if you want to play the game, just buy a sub and at least play as many storylines as you can in a month. Because after that, I personally don't think there's much left.
Nope.
So like I think
That's-
like
I want to say, like, if you add the story as well, it's like, I think a key part in making this work as well is difficulty. You can make it really, really hard. And I would also actually make it like an action-based game. Not even like, not a tap talk, but really a full action-based game, make it really skill-driven. So you can actually, and at some point, I think the important thing as well to want to say is with any story, there needs to be an end. A story needs to come to an end. There needs to be a point where you can just say, like, as a whole, like, we beat the game. And that's fine, because that's the point of a story. And getting there, that's the satisfaction. And can you think of the feeling, like maybe you've been in a community of this MMO for 10 years, and you finally beat the story.
Yeah, I'm memeing a little bit, but I mean, why can't we do DBZ here? Like Dragon Ball Z. Like, hear me out. In Dragon Ball Z, there's multiple planets, but it centers around some, main characters, right? A lot, the Saiyans, Nameks, and things like that. Now, every arc, there's a new villain who's essentially come to Earth or come to whatever planet they're at the time, and started, causing a muck. And essentially, the way it works is depending on the villain and their strength or power levels, it could affect maybe just one character, or it could affect everybody in the whole world. And obviously, good examples are like Cell and Boo and Omega Shenron and etc., where you have these specific villains where if they're big and great enough, everybody has to deal with them, including characters who might not actually see eye to eye with other characters they're helping. And of course, the best example of that has always been the character Vegeta. He's not really like, the most obvious good guy. I mean, he kills a lot of people and does some mean shit. But he's also the guy that you could expect will kill the person when you need them to be killed. And so I was just saying, we could even make a DBZ where you have like these threats that come in and everybody has to kind of react to this threat. Like, what can we do? But maybe they're like, Card said, there's some choice in that aspect. In Asheron's Call, what made that particular battle that I mentioned, I think it was like the Battle of Thistledown or whatever, what made that battle so significant was that players at first just saw the crystals. That's all the information they had. When things got bad is when players started to break into the crystals. And that's good storytelling, right? It's simple, but it's like, you got these crystals and they're powerful and they're crystally. What are you going to do with them? They're kind of magic. Maybe you open them, maybe you leave them. Well, people started opening them, and then all of a sudden these monsters and things started coming out of the world, and big bosses were attacking towns. There was a boss who attacked a town and literally leveled the town. It completely just killed the town. Imagine just like Stormwind just like gets wiped out. It doesn't happen in so many games, and Asheron's Call did a really good job of that. So I think that an overarching story can absolutely work, but as people in chat have been saying and pointing out, is that it can't just be about you. Because if it's just about you, it's like, it doesn't make sense to make it then a big overarching story if you're just going to make it about me.
it should be about everybody. And as
Yeah,
you said, like the consequences should be there. If you fail at something, it could cost you dearly, and not just you, but everybody. And sorry, Oz, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say that like I feel like one of the reasons that they don't do that is because like I think the current market is really focused on like accessibility, right? So like everyone who buys the game and pays up or whatever, they like they're entitled to being able to access the content. Like they should be able to enjoy it anytime they want with whoever, well, like if it's a multiplayer, with whoever they want. And like of course like something like what we were talking about will be time limited. And then like maybe if you were like a weaker player, like a casual player who was not properly geared up, like hey, maybe you would be just a pawn, right, instead of like being like this like savior figure.
And some characters should be more like heroic than others. I'm sorry, but that's just something people have to come to grips with. And
Yeah. So like,
Amen.
like here's a perfect example of that. Let's say we have a big event and all 5 of us are involved. And the big event, I know it's not massive, but bear with me. It's a small MMO. No, I'm just kidding. But so a big event happens, and maybe we're split down the middle. 2 of us think we should attack the crystal. 2 of us think we should protect it. The other person's indifferent. At some point, though, there like maybe one of us decides, you know what, I'm gonna break into the crystal. I think this is the right move. And that person breaks into the crystal. Next thing you know, we realize it's a bad move. But then the other player in the party, maybe like the 5th person, manages to stop the evil. So in that story, the way you could tell it is, well, you know, we were unsure about these crystals, and one of us decided it was a good idea to break in, and the other one, you know, other people disagreed, and then this person was like, well, we have to stop this threat. And the point being is that the person who stopped the threat, they're going to be remembered as a hero, right? But is everybody in that party going to be remembered as a hero? Probably not. And that's okay, because not everybody is the hero. Not everyone stopped the threat per se. Maybe the guy that started the threat on accident, he's not a villain per se, but he also wasn't the hero.
I have a question for you, Nerdslayer. Do you think like the reason that the companies don't actually make those kind of like overarching narratives like that affect the entire world, do you think it's because they think that they wouldn't have success, or do you think it's because of like technical limitations and logistical limitations?
So I like to separate sometimes the business and art conversations in this particular regard, because sometimes it's really hard to know business-wise what they're dealing with. What I will say from what I learned from watching how the Microsoft producer broke down how content worked and how they monetized it in my Age of Empires online video, that video really taught me, really helped me learn about maybe particular cost things that I weren't thinking about before when it comes to making content. And this is a good example. So like with Asheron's Call style of content, monthly updates in story form every month. Let's think about that. In order for that to make me money, I have to have X amount of subs, right? And so where the problems arise is, how expensive is my game? How much money went into my game? That tells you how much money I have to make. And maybe it doesn't mean I have to make it immediately, but it does mean I have to make it. So like a good example is if you look at a game that has 100K subs, but the game costs millions to make, hundreds of millions to make. Sound familiar? That's why I ended up making my video about SWTOR, was because it went from 1.7, 1.8 million players in just a year to under 800,000 to under 300,000 to under 100,000, and it's just like I think when it comes to sorry, I was reading chat. Sorry, I'll let Plastic go next. I wasn't trying to talk over her, did I? I missed that. I derail myself because sometimes people say good shit in chat. Anyway.
All right, so should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
I forgot.
I'll talk then. No, it's fine. It's completely fine. I'll just speak whenever I'm ready. I actually almost forgot what I was going to say.
Well, there you go.
But yeah, but I do agree that instancing of the story and like the single player story in MMOs is just a bad idea overall. And I don't think I've really ever met a player that wanted to be the sole hero. So it's kind of strange to see that every game, almost every game, has that narrative, especially games like Guild Wars. But I guess it's easier to keep the games alive with that narrative. It is way easier to progress single player stories that have instances. It's probably way easier to do, and it's way easier to plan it for the future. And but I don't know. I just never heard anyone who would be like, oh yeah, I really love the single player story in Guild Wars 2. I hate it. Everyone who plays with me hates it. And it's weird how people love that game even though no one really loves the story. Uh, I'm just kind of a little bit baffled about that.
I
I would really
remember.
love.
Oh
Oh, no, go ahead.
no, Jackal left. I think he was trying to join in.
Yeah, but he
Forgot.
was making a lot of background noise, so I told him to go push the talk.
Okay.
Well, now I lost my. Now I lost my strings. Sorry.
We're doing it live. That's all you have to say. I'll go before he goes then. I wanted to finish answering Osai's question that I forgot. To be specific, business-wise, I think it has to do with the fact that is it worth getting 300,000 subs paying $10 to $15 a month versus just making a free-to-play game or making a game that has buy-to-play, free-to-play, subscription, fucking DLC, loot boxes, you name it, whatever you could possibly fit into it. I think that's part of it, right? Like you have like that argument, but then you also have the artistic argument, which is I frankly think that it's very hard to learn how to tell a story without having to tell it, if that makes sense, ham-fisted. So it's kind of like the difference between storytelling and Dark Souls, and the difference between storytelling and, I don't know, just insert any other action game, which is a lot more self-contained as a story. Point being is like you can take Dark Souls lore as you want it, right? Or you can kind of leave it. You don't necessarily need to know the story to know kind of what you're doing. But if you're playing a game, you know, like an MMO, really, you don't really need to know that much about your single story. If anything, because it has MMO in it, it would be a story you would think that would have to be about how does this affect everybody? How does this affect the world? So artistically, I think that's hard to do. I think it's hard for an artist, a writer, let alone a developer, to figure out a way to constantly keep iterating and iterating in a way where it's just not like super simple to do, easy, repeatable content. Something more along the lines of real threats. And that takes people constantly being devoted to that. I mean, Asheron's Call had a particular team that was focused on their live updates. Matrix Online did the same thing. I think The Secret World tried to do that as well. Other games tried to do it and maybe weren't so successful. But I think that maybe that's another thing. Have an RP team, a live content team that works with your team, who's constantly trying to evaluate the game, its balance, but also look at like story or things like that. Like how can they change the story in a way like Eve did more recently, you know, where they decided Eve could have done that at any moment, right, Card? When you say that they could have done that at any other moment, but it's like they started doing it now, maybe for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why, but I'm just saying more things like that could be done.
It depends on your setup. Like, are you making a game where you're keeping the small updates, or do you make the game and just put it out there and the story is just ready and people have to just discover it? But that's, that depends on the sort of game that you want to make in the end. Anyhow, Jekyll, you want to add something?
Yeah, so in my opinion,
what's
if you're
up,
going to make an
Kasapi85?
MMO and story-based, you have to consider a lot of issues. Like you said, buy to play versus subscription, because even if you make an amazing story, if the gameplay and the end game content isn't good enough to keep a lot of the dedicated players once the story is done, they're either going to move on or maybe they might stay and try out other story types. But a lot of people like a very specific style. And, or rather, for example, in a D&D situation, a lot of people will gravitate towards one category, like chaotic evil, chaotic good. And yes, people can switch up their characters, but sometimes it's a lot more fun to do certain things than others. And that, I call this kind of like the Skyrim paradox, where it's Skyrim in a way you can write your own story. There's the guy Fudge Muppet who devoted a lot of his channel to creating characters and builds with their own lore and backstory. And because of that, you can kind of imagine a lot of things and do what you want, but at the same time, regardless of what you say, there are only, let's just say, 10 actual times where what you say has an impact on how the game goes.
I think the point is there's a difference, like impact in what you say and how the game goes from an individual level does not translate to an MMO. Like that's the whole point between creating a overarching story, is that it's not really what you say, it's more like your actions as overall people that count. Like, sure, there will be personal consequences to you, maybe. Like, if you're gonna be really pissing off a certain NPC faction, that may have an effect on you. But on the overall story, it's like if you may say something really mean to this faction, but if most of the players support this faction and they pull them through to the next level of the game, so to speak, because they defeated this next boss, then it's not really going to affect much. But hey, if a lot of people are with you, then it may affect the game story differently. But on an individual basis, you will not have the impact, because that's why it's an MMO.
Yes, and that's something like I kind of want to ask, when you say story, D&D story, when you pinged me, NS, D&D, even if the dev or even if the GM says, hey, you are the whole objective of this is to end up eventually at this dragon that you're going to have to defeat or neutralize in one of the many ways. But at the same time, a lot of stories don't even get to that. So what happens in between is really pivotal. And the fact is, you can't have the same interactions in an MMO that you can have in D&D, because unless they write in several thousand different options and that's just millions of lines of dialogue text, you don't get the same feeling. It's kind of
and I think that's where you differentiate your markets as well. Because if you go really large, then you need to understand you're going to be more limited. And there's nothing wrong with a more linear story. And see the people are going all crazy on it. It's like, linear stories, we have been writing those for freaking centuries.
Yeah, that always cracks me up.
Enjoying them for freaking centuries. Like, I don't know, are you people reading books, watching movies, watching TV shows, playing many games? It's like single, linear stories, are the most common of all. Like, these branching stories are really more of a development that we have seen with games. And even with games, we just notice that we can only do so much. And that's something people just have to learn to accept. It's like, so if you can say the story is a need to get to the dragon, and maybe you can have a few choices on how to get there, but in the end, you knew from the start your story is kill the dragon. That's what you're gonna do. And if you're like, I don't like that, then don't partake in that story. Find one that you think like, oh, I like that.
Well, that's kind of where I draw it, because D&D isn't, for example, in my opinion, the right choice to use. I would say Skyrim ultimately says you have to kill the dragon, you have to go kill Alduin, and that's the more plot. But at the same time, there's thousands of side quests.
Well, you know that
And
MMOs were created after D&D, right? Like it was made as like a copycat of D&D based on text games, and then that's why I bring up D&D examples, because it actually does matter. Essentially, the developers are the DM. All the developers are the DM. But the problem
yeah,
is that they give you essentially zero tools to create any of your own story. And yet they tell you that you're the chosen one, and you know that at the end you're going to go save the dragon or whatever else. So, if anything, I think it's like far more limiting even than Skyrim is in some respects. That kind of like weird, like it's D&D but it's not really D&D for some reason.
I mean, arguably, there's a lot of. I certainly agree. That's very valid. What I guess it's hard for me to phrase this, but just because even though MMOs are based on D&D and you do get some of the feel, the main appeal for me of D&D and the reason I don't play it, I play it and I don't play something like WoW nearly as much, is because of the fact that even though WoW and all these other MMOs are somewhat derived from the Dungeons and Dragons and text-based games, at the same time, because technology hasn't developed, it's very limiting. I mean, one of the main things about D&D, and that makes it so fun, and even in the age where there's virtual reality, people will still gravitate back towards D&D, is because you feel as if you are who your character is. You get a chance to be something else, and even if you choose to be the goody two shoes of a game, it's there's a lot of things you can and can't do, and the limitations are so much more expressed in this than they are in D&D, where regardless of what the DM says, the party can try and force another situation.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So when it comes to like comparing MMOs to D&D, I actually prefer playing WoW instead of classic D&D for a very almost a sad reason. It's just that I enjoy role playing alone. I just like being thrown into a world and just go through quests by myself and just imagine how my character reacts. And it's just easier for me, right? I can do it in my own time. I don't have to gather people. I don't have to reschedule things. It's yeah, for some people just MMOs are a better thing. And I just wonder if story driven MMOs just might not be giving chance players enough to make their own stories and actually make their own instances that they could share with others, like make their own mini stories, make their own mini adventures. I think Neverwinter has something like that. I've played it for a short time, but
They did.
yeah. I mean, the game has many issues, but I really like that about it. And that would be perfect for me as well, right? Because I can go through many different adventures that developers didn't have to think about and make, yet I can do them alone, right? I don't have to gather a story, I don't have to gather a DM.
I think those are two different sorts of games that you can make. I mean, you can make an MMO and you can give players the creative tools to make some of their own adventures. And I think if you do it well and you create good tools, you can create something that people will have a lot of fun with. I do, however, not think that's really something you would do in a MMO that you really base around making it the overarching story. Because within a open world like that with an overarching story, you can make your own story for your character. That's the whole point. Is like, as we said earlier, you can have some people that do indeed go up front, but you have some people that just stay behind. Some people just like, you know what, all of this fighting stuff, it's not for me. I'm just gonna start a farm, because people will need food. Somebody may start a smith, or somebody will just like, I'm just gonna explore this area where we are in. We're gonna explore it in more depth because I think there's more to be discovered here that could be useful. There are many different ways in which you can give players freedom to move around on their own, if they so desire, or in a small party.
I
think,
have to.
yeah, go ahead.
I I kind of have to ask because story based can be anything. Obviously, most games will have to have an overarching story, even if they're going to give you the freedom. But let's take the farm example. There are a lot of game like BDO. You can make your own farm and you can be a farmer, but at the same time, it doesn't give you enough freedom to do that. Now, let's just say another game does give you the freedom to do that. It would take a lot of stuff is usually locked behind levels. You know, the more you progress, the more ingredients you unlock. So let's just say you said if you really want to live the life of a farmer, there has to be a game with such an insane amount of freedom that it becomes its own world and not just a
It's,
game.
that's the whole point of an MMO. It should be its own world. That's what you should be creating. I think that's something that we've been missing in so many MMOs. It's like we want that world. We want that open world. We want that freedom.
Well, the business is so opposed from each other. That's kind of what I was saying when Plastic pointed out how Neverwinter had that quest creating system. It did, and it's actually one of my favorite kinds of systems. Like I always talk about the Chronicler and Galaxies because I love the idea of being able to create a quest and be able to create our own story and have the tools to do all of that. I think the problem is though is that and developers are realizing this, which is why they're quietly getting rid of things like the Foundry system in Star Trek and in Neverwinter. It's because they're opposed to it, just by the way that they design their content. They want to sell contained stories, and so they don't want the community to compete against them, because guess what? They will lose.
I need to specify something. I'm sorry, I worded it wrongly. An MMO, it's supposed to be a new, fresh world, and that's a lot of video games for that. But in a way, you have to decide between being a visitor and being a resident. In World of Warcraft, it starts you off as just a common soldier. You get a little bit of backstory. You start off as some, more or less low-ranking guardsman or other thing, and eventually you end up fighting alongside the heroes. And you have to wonder at what point are you living the life and what point are you playing as something, because there's in certain games you're just kind of a visitor to the world. You're not there, you're not really invested in your character emotionally, you're not invested in the backstory or the lore, you're kind of just there for the ride, you're just watching
If
things happen.
they're going to be very straightforward, in my opinion, there, if the game does not succeed in immersing you into its world, I think, quite frankly, it has failed. It should immerse you into the world. It should make you feel part of the world. It should make you feel invested in the world and your character. If it doesn't do that, you're not going to be playing that game. Because the only reason you could possibly be playing that game at that point is like, oh, I like a game act for a mechanical challenge. I just don't think that's not really your MMO territory. But that's especially when you're talking about story-focused games. If you have a story-focused game that doesn't make you invested in your character, that doesn't make you care about your character and the world, it has categorically failed.
I agree. I think it has to be essentially like Super Smash Bros. Melee. It has to be a game that's like technical, mechanical aspects are so impressive that people will still play it even, 16 years later or whatever at this point. Not many MMOs are going to have a feedback or gameplay loop that's like anything comparable to that, though. So, if anything, it's a lot better for them to rely on story, because their engine is always going to be hampered by the fact that they have to have a bunch of people on screen, essentially.
Yeah, I'm somewhat poorly wording it, but like in a way, you start off in WoW, and a lot of people, when they first started, they feel like they're a part of the world. But now, when I'm getting to battle for Azeroth, I don't know. It doesn't feel the same as when I started off. I don't get the feeling of anything, because a lot of the late game, battle for Azeroth, you get a few missions, you feel a little bit a part of it, but it's just so vastly different from the beginning, and then at the same time, it's so vastly different from what the end game content is, which is a lot of raiding and grinding for gear. And then because the people who are in the end game, grinding and constantly raiding, are usually the people who are constantly keeping up their subscription and not just waiting until new content comes out. You have to kind of pander to those people, because even if WoW story started off making me feel like a part of the world, at the same time, at the end of it, I kind of zoomed out, because I feel like it's at the end of the game, you're just sitting there running the same missions over and over, and it just feels different.
I think there's a reason why it's losing so many people, because it is failing at making you feel like part of the world. But anyhow, Nerdslayer, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that you think about my last time playing BFA, my experience was, and I do this basically with, like, to tell you guys my mindset for any MMO that I play. I go in with, like, okay, what's the lore? What's the world? Let me figure out a little bit about who I'm playing as, who I'm playing for. So if I'm like one faction or one race or whatever, right? So I find out a little bit about my character, its backstory, the faction, what the world is, what I'm doing here. And then once I spawn, I'm like, okay, I'm going to pretend that I literally just like came to life in this world. And now what? And so many games, and this was my problem with BFA that I outlined in my video on the game, was that early on it's like, okay, I'm all these great things, but yet I still feel like I'm kind of just like fetching around. It's kind of like, at what point do I start to feel like an actual hero? Like, if I can actually influence things and change things like a hero could, but they can't do that because everybody is also a hero. Because if everybody had the ability to affect everything, well, obviously it wouldn't really work like that, which is why sort of in most, even if you look at D&D, most of the time, not more than one character is going to be like focused at one point or another, if that makes sense. So maybe one character has like their like champion moment at one part of the storyline, but it's rarely like everybody gets their champion moments all at the same time. Everyone gets the spotlight. It just doesn't work that way normally, just because of the way rolling works. There's a lot of chances to fail if you're trying to do actions or whatever else. But with BFA, to go back to WoW, when I played classic WoW, what was interesting was you could say the point of, well, a lot of that stuff that you mentioned is still there. Here's where it's different for me. It's different because nobody's treating me like I'm some big champion, warrior, awesome, cool guy, right? They're just treating me like I'm some grunt. So like I don't mind doing the meaningless quote unquote quest in early WoW, in classic WoW, because I'm just a nobody anyway. So it's like that's what I would be doing. So it's more believable for me that even if it's like simple quest design because it's back in 2004, it still makes more sense for me as a new, orc recruit to go and kill some, whatever I'm killing at the time, like boars or some shit.
Boars, probably.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that like I agree, you really have to be immersed, because yes, there are some people who really like being the hero, and arguably so many games use that in order to justify you being able to use a lot of different styles of weapons and magic with no actual commitment unless you make up your own story. But at the same time, some people want to be the hero. Some people want to role play as like I don't know that name, but you farming. Some people really like that laid back, relaxing, just kind of keeping at your own pace, and that's where you have to wonder, at what point does it become too little and too much?
Yeah, well, I think we had a lot of good discussion. I'll use this as my chance to end it before we open up the portal of more MMO talk and all of that good stuff any further, since I know there's not a whole lot to do at the moment besides just talk about it. And I'm just kidding, but hopefully everybody here at least is playing some sort of.
The truth hurts.
I know it does. It does.
The pain.
Only 12 more years until Star Citizen's next delay announcement.
Exactly. Anyway, thank you everybody for stopping by for this weekly question and weekly MMO Roundtable. Thank you for joining me on the podcast, of course, and participating in all of that. It was good to have all of you. Yeah, thank you. See you guys later. Let's go ahead and move the segment along, right?
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, so thank you to everybody who participated in the MMO Roundtable discussion this week. I thought we had some really interesting discussion that I myself haven't really got the chance to have, because I haven't thought enough about like how does story work in a MMO, because we've seen so many like examples of it not necessarily working. One thing I'd like to add is that I do think that the Asheron's Call style of storytelling can work. I just think that it's hard to convince a publisher or somebody with enough money to make an MMO of that stature to like rely on a business method that isn't necessarily as proven as the other methods in the current market, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like that sort of game might have to come from the indie market. Might have to come from somebody outside of the sphere of influence of these big investors and big publishers who aren't going to want to have a game that's like, maybe we can make money in a year, right? Whereas they'd rather have all of that content kind of front-loaded. Maybe you spend money on an expansion versus like over the course of a couple of months or whatever. Is it possible to bring up the names on screen? Yeah, we can do that. Sorry, I don't know why I didn't think about that before, but I do believe Discord has an overlay, so I can do that. That's a good idea, Choruses. In fact, if Card, maybe you want to write that down in chat so we can fix that later. I'm sure it doesn't take that much effort to figure out. Just realized WoW Classic was a perfect for that. If you wanted to be the hero, you had to put in real work to kill the raid bosses. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point, Elondris. I didn't think about that. Rant time? Yeah, exactly. It's getting to that point, right? We're about an hour and 40 something into the podcast, so not too bad. We're doing good on time. It's pretty hard to make a story compelling where you slay a god 1 second and you're finding orange juice for Timmy the set. And that's the problem is like, I think these guys get into scenarios where they can't really get out of it, storytelling wise. And I'd love to talk to Chris Avalon about storytelling and MMOs sometime. Just because I know, like, obviously he's a writer, he's a designer, he knows a lot about creating worlds and creating stories. I'd like to ask him some questions specifically sometime about MMOs and kind of where he sees that they could get better at. But one point that I wanted to make was that I think with the day you get through a podcast without a rant, I will drop 10 subs. I mean, I think the rant is kind of the fun part, right? MMORPG can't be an indie game, though. I mean, that's already not true, right? I mean, if you look at the vast majority of games that are operating in the Kickstarter space or operating on early access, I mean, they would have what you would describe as an indie budget, if you will. Remember, that's relative. MMO indie budgets are a little bit more expensive than the standard indie budget for an RPG game or something. I feel like the gameplay doesn't properly justify the story. What was the last time you guys actually had fun playing a quest for the gameplay itself and not the story? I mean, I guess the example I would think in that regard, where I had fun playing a quest for the gameplay and not the story, was probably actually Project 1999, EverQuest. The reason why I picked that one is it's a game where the gameplay is, I'm sorry, it's just pretty shitty. It's old, it's outdated as shit. It barely works. Like, the movement barely works. It's not the best gameplay experience. And yet I still had fun questing in that. And I think the simple reason that I had fun questing in that game is because questing in that game was designed like it was in games like Meridian 59 and text-based games as well, and former text-based games. Because in this world, like Neverwinter Nights Online, the AOL version, these kind of games were all about saying keywords. So it was like you said, quest. Then they would be like, oh, I have a quest. Go talk to, Baron von Bockersniker. And then you go like, okay, you click on that. And then now you find, okay, so where is this guy at? Maybe you find him in the city and you talk to him. But it's not just like dialogue options that you just click, right? You have to type in a keyword. And so you would say like, hey, how are you doing? Or hello, you'd greet them. Then they'd say hello to you, and they'd tell you what their faction standing was with you. You'd click on them and observe them. So if they were like indifferent towards you, if they disliked you, if they were angry at you, they might actually attack you. Because in EverQuest, you could spawn as a dark elf and be literally killed on sight by human players and be killed on sight by the human NPCs because they don't like dark elves. So it's kind of like you actually had to know if this person was friend or foe. So in Project 1999, if you saw somebody, you'd slowly approach them and get close enough to see if you could identify them. If you could identify them, it would tell you, are they indifferent towards you? Are they angry at you? Are they going to attack you? So you'd be like, And now you're making these decisions. Well, this guy might attack me. I need to be careful. Like, maybe I need to get more faction renown for this particular faction. Maybe he'll like me more. That's possible. You can increase your faction with these particular people. So maybe now, after you started with them hating you, now they like you. And that starts to affect the way that you play with them and play with the story. And the cool thing about all of this really is just based around the simple idea that in order to find the clues, you have to actually figure it out. You got to pay attention. Now, obviously, I'm sure after a while, people figured out guides of always what the right things were to say and whatever else, right? Because that just happens. But if you just played it on your own volition, you were in situations and you would just think, what do I want here? Like, what am I doing here? And you'd be like, well, I'm trying to get this quest, so like, let me type in like what the quest is. Or let me type in the thing that I need, the person I'm trying to find. And that was you basically kind of like role-playing with the NPCs, if you think about it. Now, the rant for this week really is just based around the idea of why is it that in order for... I don't want to say like in order for... I take that back. Why is it that nowadays... sorry. Where's my soapbox at? Here it is. Nowadays, like the way that content is structured in that regard is like, you don't get a lot of time. Dang it. No, sorry, I'm derailing myself again. I changed my soapbox. When it comes to like that classic style of content, interacting with NPCs isn't very common anymore. And it's essentially, I think, at fault of developers. They've taken AI and just simplified it and been like, it's just AI. It doesn't do anything. It has no purpose. It's just kind of there, and you just kill it, and it's just like a spectator. I think that that is so backwards. It's why I always tell people that Morrowind could be an MMO. If you took Morrowind and just gave it the ability to have more players on screen and it work, conceivably. And by the way, I know that there's co-op mods, but I'm talking about an actual MMO version of Morrowind. It could work. And my reasoning for that is that NPCs actually move around, they do activities, they live a life, they go to sleep, they steal, they track players down. Like, there's actions that they're doing in the game that takes time. And I think that's what's so much lacking now, and what I like so much about Project 1999, EverQuest 1's, original version, was that there's way more interconnectivity between you, the world, and also the other people in the world, which, by the way, are part of the world. Isn't that strange to think about? AI, it's just computers, right? It's just AI. Or is it something more? What if I told you that AI could roleplay, right? AI can roleplay. AI can create stories, right? This is very common. So then why do we see AI and treat it as so, non-human-like? And yet we want people to care about these make-believe characters. Does that make sense? By devaluing the AI and making them essentially just placeholders who stand around, you make us essentially care less about them. So whenever they do go away, we're just like, who cares? He'll just respawn. Or like, oh, this part happened over here? Oh no. Then you look around, it's like nothing changed. So you're like, that guy said his like daughter just died. Why is he still standing in the same place? Whatever. And you just go to the next zone. But then you see it again. Oh, I'm in such a rush to get to this place. Characters are just like standing static. He's like, I must get there quickly. Hurry. Can you help me in my quest? That's like acting in a MMO. because it's like you're acting with this like weird, like not even like somewhat even close to realistic AI, right? Where like the AI is just like, oh yes, quest, here you go. In fact, people have made memes about this. There's a bunch of YouTube videos where people make fun of like the WoW quest, where it's like you go up to the person, it's like it creates this like super sad story, and then at the end it's like, would you like to repeat the quest? It's like yes or no. Would you like to repeat the quest? It's like basically, right? That's kind of what it is. Anyway, my point here, my rant here is that it's how can you make AI actually matter? Making them sit there, making them stand there, static, just giving you shit. Clearly that's not working, right? I think we figured that out after like 20 years of different MMOs launching and having static AI who do nothing. Also, why is it that AI is going backwards? How come AI in Project 1999 could figure out that I wanted to quest with them, give me a quest, and also have like individual renowned dispositions with me, like me, even attack me on sight based on if they liked me or not liked me, different things like that. How come we had that? How come MMOs these days don't have it? Like, well, because as you start to move things around in the world, and no longer are you maintaining the balance of that ecosystem, you start to tamper with things that you shouldn't tamper with. And I think that big things that you shouldn't tamper with are things that remove consequence and remove the living part of the world. And a good example of this. In Project 1999, if I remove certain NPCs, the world kind of continues on, you know, like there's still other quests to get, like there's still people moving around in the world, they're still taking it seriously, there's still people getting on the docks and whatever else, right? That still happens. But sorry if you guys hear that in the background, that's my little puppy. I don't know if y'all hear the yipping in the background, but anyway. But if you want to take it to the next level, and you want to, let's say you're playing Project 1999, or sorry, you're playing WoW, and you remove an NPC. Theoretically speaking, you could remove an NPC that would actually unravel the world. Wouldn't you guys kind of agree with that? Wouldn't you agree with that? Like, for example, if I removed like, if I removed like a certain flight NPC in Stormwind, the game could still function, but would it really function in the same way necessarily? Well, no, because he's needed in order to fly. But what if flying was just a matter, or sorry, of traveling was just a matter of traveling, and it was always seen as that way? Well, you see, my point is that as you start to mess with the balance of the world, you start to affect the way things work. When you can just remove things from the game, like NPCs, and it doesn't affect the world plays, or affect the way that the world plays, I think that shows that it's a poor world by construction. Now, you know, most worlds, for example, let's take our world as a good example. If I just remove myself from this world, sure, you guys won't get my videos or content anymore or whatever else, but generally speaking, the world's going to go on, right? Like, the world's going to keep turning, the sun's going to keep coming up, water, you know, it's going to move, the tides are going to shift, all of that stuff. But in a MMO, is it necessarily the same way? I mean, not whenever they design it around you being the super, super mega hero awesome guy, because it's like, if I'm the superhero mega awesome guy and I stop playing the game, does the game just like not work anymore? Like, are they fucked? Do they no longer have the chosen one? Oh, you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's weird to think of it in that way, but that's kind of how single player games are. A single player game, you can hop into your game a year after having not played it and be like, picking up right where I left off, right? No problem. Let's pick up right after, you know, 20 hours into my game or whatever. Boom, I'm in the story. In a MMO, could I do the same thing? Like, in a game like Asheron's Call, in a game like Galaxies, in a game like, you know, just some of the more original MMOs that really brought RP to the forefront. Could I play those games in the same way if I just stopped playing for a year? Like, hell no. The world would change, and it should change. Hopefully, new guilds are erected. People get new types of gears and create new quests and have new adventures and new experiences and these other kinds of... The point is that I should not be able to just press a button, click out of my world, and boom, that's not really how an MMO is supposed to work. It's supposed to work where, boom, I hit log out and I go into the real world to log into that MMO, which, by the way, has a lot of microtransactions. Anyway, I digress. I log into that world. When I go back into my world, I want it to feel like, all right, what did I miss? Or don't you guys love that when you play an MMO and you log in, you're like, all right, what did I miss? Hey, what's up, guys? You're talking to your community and guild. You're like, hey guys, what's going on? What's everyone doing today? You want to figure out what's the new kind of event. What's the news, right? What's the update? What's going on today in the world? But when you erase a lot of that and you erase a lot of that feeling of that, you have a world where you just log in and you're just like, all right, like this one. Nothing. All right. I'm done. But that's not the same. It's not the same experience when you go into a world and you're thinking, my place in this world can be significant or insignificant. That's up to me. Versus, you are always significant. You are the most significant. You are super duper significant. You better save the world in like 10 seconds or the world's gonna die. Oh yeah, but if you log off and like don't play for 6 months, like don't worry, like the expansion content's still there, story content's still there. You can skip leveling. You don't need to level, right? Yeah, leveling, screw that. You don't need a journey. A hero's journey, we'll give you the hero if you know what I mean. You're level 110. Now you just gotta level up 10 levels and get back to the story in 6 months. It's like, that's not really how a living world would work. If I went to sleep right now and woke up in 6 months, a lot of shit would have happened. I wouldn't just wake up and be like, okay, let me check my daily quests off and okay, here you go. It wouldn't work that way. I would wake up and be like, okay, in my house, where do I live? Like, what happened to this person? What's the current news, you know? Do I have food? Do I have money? Or whatever else. Neopets used to have news and a lot of player agency. Or one person would screw up everything because they decided to kill the raid boss of the friendly camp. Fun fact, on my old RP server, there was a guild that published their own newspapers with server events and happenings. Yeah, my guild did that in Galaxies for a little bit. Ours was mostly propaganda because we were Imperial stormtroopers. I was in a elitist RP clan for as a stormtrooper. In fact, I believe I was a captain. Or I might have been... I think I was a captain. That was some pretty serious roleplay, by the way. I remember, like, everyone was always in character, and you always had to, like, check people's IDs and like, the cantina and shit, and... I miss those days, right? When you would roleplay as a stormtrooper, but you would actually land your shots for once. In Neopets, the medieval zone literally got wiped off the map because the king was assassinated. Huh, I would have never thought that I would have seen such a thing or heard of such a thing in Neopets. Pretty impressive. You get Ashbringer, you get an Ashbringer, you get an Ashbringer. Everyone gets an Ashbringer. Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem, is that whenever not everybody's logging in and has like a similar goal to work towards, either like their personal journey or like some overarching goal of like doing raids and things like that. Funny that Alandros mentioned that earlier, but WoW did do a really good job of that. You had your ability to do your own personal stuff. You could level up on your own and whatever else. And by the way, despite contrary to popular belief, is what I was looking for. You can play WoW solo, WoW Classic solo. Just when you're leveling, though, right? You can't really do the other stuff that well solo unless you're like a hunter or something, but you could do that journey solo. You could have your solo journey, but then you can go do a group quest, or then you can go do a dungeon, or do a raid, which has story to it as well. And it's like, I think that that's kind of how it has to be. Like, you can't tell everybody that your main story is the main plot, because you're taking away the personal journey of your character and you and your leveling process, right? Because MMOs keep getting rid of those things, but you're getting rid of that, which is very important. And you're just skipping to the end of D&D where you're level 20 and you got all your OP shit, and then you're just like, all right, now let's somehow make consequence still matter, even though you're like super duper powerful roleplay wise and also just character wise. So we'll just give this boss like 6,000 billion health, and you've got to spend like 3 hours killing it, right? I wouldn't do well in an RP guild when speaking in voice chat. I would just crack up. Well, Kasapi, first off, there's a lot of misconceptions about RP clans, so I guess let me be the one to dispel some of these. Well, first I'll just mention that the clan that we're going for in Classic WoW is going to be light RP, what I would describe as light RP, which means that anything said in /say will be in character. But everything else is out of character, and trust me, most guilds are like that. Most RP guilds are going to be like that. They're not going to require you be in character all the time when you're chatting. I mean, at that point, you're playing D&D. Like, that's a hardcore RP clan. That's a heavy RP clan. If you would have to be in character in voice comms, yeah, that's not for me. More power to people who like that. But I prefer light RP, where it's like, we are RPing in character in-game because that's my character. In real life, that's not my character, so I'm not role-playing that. I'm, role-playing my character in the game, if that makes sense. It's a small distinction. I level solo and play at max level solo, just soloing lower level dungeons. Not even the heaviest RP guilds I've seen do that. I might have seen one in my time at RPing for, shit. The first MMO that I ever RP'd in was probably Habbo Hotel, right? I was like 8 or 9 when I played that. That was in 02, 03. So 16 years ago was the first time I roleplayed online. Yeah. I didn't know a lot of people that would roleplay in voice comms. But that's a meme that gets said a lot, because I get it. Don't know what to expect. Then it's like, oh shit, we're just all like charging into battle, fucking saying wag and, for the horde and shit like that. It's like, that'd be kind of funny to do every now and then. I'm not gonna lie. To yell that in comms just to get people excited. But are we gonna like seriously like do that? Probably not, right? Because you gotta mix in roleplay with like keeping it fun. And roleplay isn't like, I'm a grunt, so I'm gonna clean shit in the pins like all day. It's like, if that's your idea of fun roleplay, by all means go roleplay that you're cleaning shit out of the den. And whatever else. But me, it's like, what's fun for me with roleplay, the reason why I'm creating a guild, is I like to command a force and just like go attack key locations and like, strike out against the alliance and create this like conflict of why we hate them so much. They killed my dog, like Keanu Reeves, like whatever it is, right? You create that conflict and you can have that ever-present conflict between, but you don't have to make it like, on the 4th day, in voice comms, I spoke to my master and told him that I would be destined for greatness. Like, yeah, you don't have to go to that level if you don't want to. I'm not sure you're familiar with the adventure quests, but they had campaigns and stuff which affected the world and NPC interactions. It's cool. I almost never had fun in a RP guild because their RP events were super scripted and not dynamic. I think that the problem with that, thanks for the host, by the way, Rogue 9 or Rogue 9. I'm not sure how you to pronounce that. I can see that point though, Plastic. I think the problem is that scripted events, as Card pointed out actually earlier with scripted questing, is way easier to do. So it's way easier to do, therefore it's going to be more often done. The way that I think that you keep that exciting is PvP. Hey, right? How does PvP keep RP exciting? Because it's always changing. And guess what? This ain't wrestling. You don't know who's going to win unless you plan that ahead of time. Sometimes you could go into a battle with some big elaborate plan. We're going to siege. And then you get there and you just get stomped. You guys get wiped out. That's part of your story, though. You don't just say, let's do it again. Like, we got to make sure we actually get it. No. You'd be like, well, we suffered a great defeat at the hands of the Alliance forces at Stranglethorn Valley or whatever. Or Vale, sorry. Stranglethorn Vale. And we decided to, attack their flight master, or flight navigator, or whatever else, in order to retaliate for them wiping us, to get them to come back and fight us again. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's evolving constantly because it changes. But, like, that's my problem with RP and PvE is kind of like, it's kind of easy, first off. So if the only RP that you're doing is just conflict with the game, it's not enough RP for me. I think RP that combines conflict with the game with also conflict of the world and the players in the world, that's why I like RP PvP. Because it's just like, how do you keep an event from being too scripted in a RP PvP clan? You don't have that problem. Because PvP isn't scripted. unless you script it on purpose. What about time-gated event zones instead of large expansions? Which is easier for devs? I would argue that easier would be relative to which question are you asking, artistically or business-wise. I think business-wise, it's easier to do time-gated event zones. From the perspective of it costs less money. The problem with it is it doesn't have as high of a return on investment as an expansion has or has had in the past. And currently speaking, since most games don't really rely on subscription-based ways of paying besides like Final Fantasy and WoW, most games don't have such things because they don't put their money, their money-making content, they don't structure their money-making content in that way. To make money in most current MMOs requires you to purchase things in the cash shop. Purchase expansions, adventures, items, XP boosts, you name it. And so you think, okay, how do I create a game that can have a constantly evolving storyline, but also make it like appealing for investors? The only way is essentially that you can safely say that you're going to have enough players playing the game month in, month out, that you're going to be able to have a consistent audience. Except that's the whole hard part of an MMO in the first place. You see my point? It's like having the model where you're like, hey, in 1 year, we're going to have this evolving storyline and it's going to be awesome. That is awesome. I love that kind of shit. That's why I've been talking about it. That's why I think Asheron's Call does a fantastic job of that, and more games should learn from that. The problem is like, that's a lot to ask of an investor or a publisher or something, you know? Like, hey guys, like I'm going to create this story and trust me, in a year, it'll make sense. The work will be worth it. Remember, dollars got to make sense, right? So it can't just be we put in a year of content and it made us no money in comparison. Obviously, they have to charge a monthly fee because they have to make money. But what if they're making more money by not doing that, by offering less content and yet more microtransactions? Well, that's the problem in today's current market, is people have to be reminded again, and I mean people as in like the business guys, have to be reminded again that you can have an MMO with a loyal fan base that can keep producing content because of its loyal fan base, just based off of the fact that they pay $15, $10 a month, whatever it is, right? That can still work, but it's hard to convince people that that can work because these other ways of making games make more money. And simply put, they make more money. It's hard to constantly update a game. It's hard to month in, month out update a game and update it in a way that keeps it fresh, either story-wise or gameplay-wise. And so imagine doing that when you don't think the return on the investment is quite worth it. Well, now you have the problem of why most MMOs don't do that. They're not convinced that either it makes enough money or it's reliable enough for them yet. One thing I will say is, of course, there is exceptions. Most of the exceptions, however, unfortunately, are mostly theme park games. Lord of the Rings, KOTOR, Secret Worlds, and Final Fantasy XIV. Well, bad example. Final Fantasy XIV has a sub, so bad example. But I meant just like those kind of games, right? That rely on getting you from the expansion to the next expansion. That doesn't really exist as much in the same way that it did. Final Fantasy XIV is about the only one that has a sub fee and still does the expansions like they used to do back in the day. Like MMOs used to do back in the day. Elder Scrolls, though, right? Like Elder Scrolls has like 16 billion ways to monetize. And I think that's a bit of the problem. Do we have any more questions, by the way? I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the call-in segment as I've been ranting a little bit here. So if you'd like to get your questions in with me before the podcast ends today, now's your time. I'll also go back and read any of the questions that I've already missed, if I have missed any. Yeah, that's actually, to go back a little bit, Binato made a point about whales. Whales is... Oh no, you didn't miss much cards, okay. But whales are essentially required in order to keep constant evolving story MMOs functioning. The problem is that it wouldn't need to be so tightrope, meaning that as soon as they have a bad expansion or as soon as they don't have enough content updates, it just dies. The way that they solve that problem is by giving you more tools to create the content yourself. But why don't they do that? I ask it a lot, but I feel like it's just like I want people to realize why. Why aren't they letting us have the tools in our hands? Frankly speaking, I think they're afraid. I think they're afraid that we'll do it better than them. I think that. I think they're afraid that we will make their content obsolete, which is true. I mean, at this point, it's not controversial for me to say that the community creates better stories and better mods and better quests than the actual developers of these games. I mean, there are so many good examples of this where once you give the community the access, guys, they can create magic. They have way more time, and guess what? Business isn't a problem for them. That's the main thing about using your community to create your own content, is that they're not doing it for money like your developers are. They're just doing it for the mere passion. Just the passion. Just because they love the game, right? Think about the difference there. You can trust that if the community has the tools, they're going to try and create cool shit. You can trust that. Just look at most games that have moddable communities. You can think about it, they probably have a mod for it. And so, why aren't developers ready to do the same kind of modding for us, right? And create all... Well, because they have to think about the money, right? They have to think about those consequences. And so that's why I say, instead of just being like, well, then therefore we won't give them the tools so we can control all of monetization ourselves. I say, screw that shit. Make people pay a sub to use the Foundry system or class creation system or quest creation system or whatever system you do to create more content in the game. Let players, you know, maybe only use it if they pay a sub fee or some shit. I'm just saying that there's ways that you can monetize letting players have access to creating content. I think it's something that MMOs have been severely lacking, and it's why Minecraft blew up. I mean, let's just be honest here for a second. Minecraft makes the MMO genre look like child's play. And no pun intended, by the way. But it looks like small fish by comparison. And why is that? Because Minecraft has been able to attract both a large casual audience and a large cult following. That is not very common, but why could they do it? Because they didn't just rely on instant shit. They didn't just rely on scripted shit. They gave you the tools to create your own worlds, and people did that. I mean, do I even need to talk about the amount of worlds and crazy like structures that people have built in Minecraft? All I'm saying is just give players an inkling of that in a MMO, and maybe they will actually be able to create something similar in a MMO, which, by the way, kind of needs that in order to keep going, right? Because they care about their players. What about time-gated? I think I already read that one. I mean, something like each expansion being like one and done, but you can revisit through something like a vision, but you can't affect the past, so it's still once and done. I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job explaining. I think I'm kind of understanding what you're saying, like a more contained expansion. And by the way, Guild Wars did a lot of stuff like that, because Guild Wars wasn't almost entirely instance, so it kind of had to. But it had like different storylines for different expansions that you could kind of take or leave it. But if you wanted to get the new skills and like the new gear and things like that, you had to play it. Like that was the cool thing about it, is that, well, it incentivized you to play the story because it was useful for you in the multiplayer context. Have I ever played or heard about Tree of Savior? I've heard about it, but I hear a lot of bad things. Why is it a problem? What's a problem? Are you saying like why player creation systems are a problem for developers? It's because, as I'm saying, you're literally competing against the developers themselves. If they make a theme park game, guess what? If they give you the access to making a theme park quest, you're competing against them. There's no way around it. You are making content that could potentially make somebody not spend money. Unless they make your thing able to be bought, right? Unless they can somehow fix that by making your shit able to be bought. But that's kind of the problem, as I've always seen it, really, is that developers in a sandbox game, of course they want you to have the tools, because they can't keep up with the amount of content. And frankly speaking, the game's not really designed for that. But in the theme park game, they don't really have a choice but to keep churning out more and more content, because then the game will just stop functioning, essentially, because it needs that. That sounds like an incentive to get people to sub. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, look, that was like my 5 seconds of thinking of an idea. I'm sure there's many other ways we can think of to make people want to sub. And I think, frankly speaking, players in this current day and age are far more willing to sub if they know what they're getting themselves into. Like, if you know that there's not going to be any hidden microtransactions, any, whatever the fuck else, like, it's like hidden under the, the mat or something. If you just know that when you plop your $30, $40, $50 game and then you get your 30 days or $15 for your 30 days, you know that that's the experience that you're going to get, and it's a good one, of course people will play that kind of game. Of course people will pay for a subscription fee. But it's just like, there's not a whole lot of games right now that are worth a subscription fee. I mean, currently speaking, there's only 2 games in the mass, MMO, like, public, I guess, that get by off of using that system. And both of them have, like, kind of extensive trial systems and also ways you can skip the early expansions. Or, sorry, skip the early content. Because once again, we get back to the point of expansions bring in new content, but unlike constant content updates, expansions sometimes completely undo your previous content, which is not really the same thing as a content update. A content update can do that, right? If, like, let's say you just wipe out this city because of some event happened. Yeah, that's possible. But that makes your regular pre-existing world more valuable. And the problem I have with expansions is whenever they add new zones, they immediately divide the player base. And they don't just divide the player base, they oftentimes make old content archaic and useless, essentially, where it no longer is useful to do. And I'm not trying to say that that's an easy thing to fix. I honestly think that's one of the hardest things to fix in MMOs is like, how do you bring in a new expansion and not just like, outdate all of your previous content? You have to find a way to do it in a way that makes sense while not just completely, actually, funny enough, I'm going to offer a counterpoint to my own point. That's my opinion of what I think you should do. But actually, like, many businesses are disagreeing with me, because if you look at games like Final Fantasy XIV, they believe that Shadowbringers being good enough is good enough to not have to fix their early game, essentially. Like, that's the bet that Final Fantasy XIV has. That's why they don't fix their early content. It's like not worth the resources, right, for them to redo like the early game experience, which most people at this point agree is not very good. Now, the problem I have with that is that, okay, so if the game was Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers the game, then I would understand that. Okay, I'm going to go play the Shadowbringers content and blah, blah, blah. I don't care about all the other stuff. But it's not. It's Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn with Heavensward, Stormblood, and I just said the name, Shadowbringers as an expansion. Point being is that I can't rate those expansions without also looking at the base game. It's literally impossible to be like, damn, Shadowbringers is perfect, if I don't think that A Realm Reborn is perfect. Now, what I could say is that Shadowbringers is a perfect addition, right? Because that's saying it's like it's an addition. But most MMO expansions aren't treated like additions. They're treated like, this is the new one. You got to play this. You got to do all of this. And I think that's a big problem with expansions, is it's kind of like you have to find a way to keep your old content relevant. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time if you think about it. Like, think about this. Final Fantasy 11, whenever I played that game, I pointed something out. They had these big, intricate cities that were complete. Why are they empty? There's no reason to be there doing anything, right? And they're just big open spaces. And it's a shame because the player community in Final Fantasy XI is really good. You have a world and player base who would like a town in which they could probably congregate and actually like share things with and have fun. And yet you have this very open, empty, static town that essentially has no uses. There's no point even living in that town in the first place. And that's a big problem I would have in Final Fantasy XI. Was just like having zones that were completely irrelevant now because they have new content. And that's the thing is like, if you're going to bring in some new expansion, you can't just take away. You have to add. But at the same time, when you're adding, you have to make sure by adding, you're not also subtracting. Because, say for example, if I add a level cap, that's not just adding content. It's actually taking content away if you think about it. Because it's now making the previous content not as important. Which means that for some people, they see it as I have to regrind, or I have to redo the raid attunements and all those other things to get it. They feel like all of their work that they put in isn't a matter of I still put that work in, it's still useful. It actually feels like to them it's like wasted time if they can't remember and enjoy the experiences enough, or they're just like butthurt in the moment. As long as it's in the game, it benefits sub. Gotcha. Problem is people do not believe it when people say there will be no microtransactions in games because we've been lied to time and time again. That's a huge problem. By the way, get your questions in, guys, because we're about to end here. You guys are not gonna. I'm not gonna let you guys let me rant for too long or too much longer. Have I started playing Final Fantasy XIV? No, but I just got paid today by the Google Supreme Overlords. So I'll be buying Shadowbringers essentially as soon as possible. I've already, funny enough, here you go. I've downloaded the game. I just haven't updated with the new expansion. So I hope it's not going to be a super long time, but even if it is, I've got Google Fiber, so I should be okay. But I'm looking at getting some play in tomorrow. We'll see about that. By the way, I don't know anything about the servers, so if you guys want to play with me, feel free. But if you really want to play an MMO with me, I don't recommend playing Final Fantasy with me. Because the first like 50 levels we can't even play together, first off. Which is just like so unbelievably just insane to me. That wouldn't be a huge red flag even for fanboys of the game to be like, maybe we should do something about that. But what I was gonna say is like, if you guys want to play an MMO with me, but you don't feel like playing the single player MMO with me, I recommend playing Classic WoW with me instead. I'm just saying, all right? Feel free to come join me play some Final Fantasy XIV, but I'm just saying from my experience so far, it looks like it's kind of hard to play with your teammates until your max level. So, at least that's not the case in Classic WoW. You literally cannot be in a group while you're doing story quests in any capacity outside of group quests. Which data center are you going to pick? Aether, Primal, or Crystal? Crap. I'm not sure, man. Does that really matter, Yugu? Because I have a couple friends in my Discord who I believe play on Crystal. So I might end up going on that one, but I don't know if that really matters. Can you just transfer, or you would recommend not Crystal? Okay. Well, damn it. I'll have to ask some of my Final Fantasy friends to see where they're at. Data centers do matter if you want to do certain content. Aether is the raids data center. I honestly don't think I'll stick around for the raids. And I know that's going to piss people off if I talk about the game. I couldn't be less enthusiastic of playing a scripted easy as shit raid. I'm sorry, it's just not really for me. Like, I watched some of the IGN gameplay of him doing the raids and the dungeons or trusts, whatever they call them, and I'm just like, these guys aren't struggling, man. Come on. I'm not hopeful they're going to be fun, and I'm not hopeful they're going to be challenging, but I'll try them. So we'll see if I'm right or wrong. That's the fun thing about trying it out, right? Well, knowing these problems with modern MMOs, do you think any attempt at a 1.14 patch would be a failure for WoW Classic, and they should just move to BC? I mean, that's just such a long discussion. I don't even know if I want to get into that one this time, because I'll have to rant endlessly about that one. But I'll talk a lot about that question in the coming weeks, especially with WoW coming out soon. We can really go into that, especially after a couple of months of playing the game. We can reevaluate and be like, okay, what's my opinion now? What do I think is going to happen? What's the plan when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV? Get all the way to the end of Shadowbringers? So, for me, like, the idea with Final Fantasy XIV was I first wanted to go in with a clear slate. Like, I'm trying to just wipe away my preconceived notions as soon as I load up the game and log in. I'm trying to just go in and take it as seriously as it wants me to take it seriously. And doing that really helped me play SWTOR. In fact, it helped me enjoy SWTOR again, because I didn't enjoy it for a long time because I was unable to do that. So I'm going to try and do that, which means I'm going to play it under the guise that it is a very theme park, very lack of community-centric MMO, which are two things that I'm extremely, like, against. But I'm going to, like, try and erase that and just look at it as, like, I want to look at it from the perspective of I'm just an MMO fan. Like, what's my opinion of this game? What do I like in the experience? Does it match what people are saying about the game? Because, like, really, the thing that has me the most interested in Final Fantasy XIV is, first, I love Final Fantasy, right? That's the first part that has me interested. The second most interesting part to me about Final Fantasy XIV is just the amount of, like, positive shit that gets said about this game. It is just insane. The levels of fandom that I've seen on the MMORPG subreddit. I mean, this is like passing like ESO level, or sorry, Guild Wars 2 levels back when Guild Wars 2 was the king. But this is getting pretty crazy. Now we're getting articles that are literally saying shit like an expansion is higher rated than a Final Fantasy title in 13 years. And they don't understand the problem there, that an expansion is rated higher than an actual game. You don't understand that they're not equivalent? How can we rate an expansion and then, like, prop it up right next to Final Fantasy VII like the guy does in this article? The expansion scored the same as Final Fantasy VII and 10 and 12 and 11, and so it's good, right? That's how it works, right? I think you just, like, compare the scores and genres don't matter. Context doesn't matter. Expansions and games are the same thing, right? That's why I want to do a video about it. It's just really annoying that I have to get through so much of that shit. And it's just like, I don't want to be the guy who's just like, wrong, right? Because that's what most people would do. I want to be the person who's like, why are you? Well, I'm going to figure that out. But one thing's for sure, we can easily say that you can't compare an expansion to a full-fledged launched game. There is no planet, but you can make an argument, I'm sorry, that Shadowbringers as an expansion, which probably has a fraction of the content that Final Fantasy X or 7 has, is better. Otherwise, it's just your subjective opinion. I'm saying, like, if you want to bring in Metacritic, which people bring in Metacritic, by the way, because they're trying to talk about objectivity. That's what this article is. It's like, look at this, it's highest rated, so it's like, objectively, it's good, right? That's how it works. And it's like, we've already been through the expansion reviews. They looked pretty lackluster. Maybe that's what it is in some effect. Is like, I rarely get the chance to review something and say my opinion on it, especially in the case of something that's so highly rated and highly touted. So I'm excited to see if Shadowbringers' story is going to be like people are expressing to me. Just sucks that I'm going to have to wait a long time in order to get there. I hope you were ready for about 100 hours to get to max level. So, like, I'm going to tell you guys a secret about me. I appreciate you guys telling me how long it takes to do certain things in games. Like, I appreciate you when you guys say, like, oh, it takes 100 hours. Oh, it's going to take a long time. But, it's like, I think you guys also forget that I'm a hardcore player. Like, yes, I make videos, and I like to be a little bit intellectual and talk about things and whatever else, but I'm a hardcore player. So, like, 100 hours to max level is nothing to me. That would be nothing. 100 hours, I could do that in, I'd say, like, with my current schedule, probably like 3 weeks, right? That gives me enough time to beat it. But, I don't know. I think this is me talking off cuff here. But I'm so excited for you guys to see how I play MMOs, because many of you haven't gotten that ability yet, because I haven't been playing a whole lot of them. But, I think you guys will enjoy watching me play, because I think that I'm competent, and I think that I will take the time to try and explain my reasoning. So when we're doing a raid, I'm not just going to say, this raid sucks. It's going to be, I don't like this raid because I don't like this particular aspect, or I don't like this particular aspect. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that with Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, I'm trying to review it as a theme park game as much as possible. As much as possible. I'm not saying that it's completely possible to do that, because you also have to take into consideration it's calling itself an MMO, remember? So I also have to rate it off of that, but I digress. They're not sure what data center on Final Fantasy. Not sure what data center on Final Fantasy 14 you're gonna be in world. Do a Savage raid. Okay, so for people who bring up Savage comments or mythic contents or comments, I'm going to say something to you that's going to maybe shatter your perspective, but it's going to be something called statistics. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of this like magical thing, but it's pretty incredible. And here's how. I'll show you how. So imagine you've got 100% of your player base, and now you've got raids in your game. I've seen numbers from developers themselves that have stated that less than 1/3 of an audience plays the raid. That's just a regular raid. Okay. So less than 1/3 of my audience is going to play my raid. Let's just take that into consideration. This is an example. So, by the way, if I can find a better one, I'll use that one. 1/3 of my player base is going to play my raid. Okay. Now, out of that third of a player base, 30% of players, how much do you think of those players would play a hard mode of that raid? Well, it would have to be less than 1%, right? Just statistically speaking, it would have to be less than 1%. So less than 1% of your audience is playing your highest level content. And so if I walk into your game and call it easy, if your rebuttal is that my game has hardcore mode, savage mode, or mythic mode, so then therefore it's not hard, I would say you don't understand statistics. Because statistics don't just work at the highest levels. It works across the spectrum. So you can't just say, my game's harder because it has this really hard mode at like the 1%, like really hard. Versus like, this much of it is really fucking easy. You see my point? The argument isn't that raids aren't, or savage raids, or mythic raids aren't easy or difficult. The conversation is the game difficult? And if only 1% of your audience is experiencing the most difficult content, the game's easy as fuck, statistically. I know, that's like, that hurts some people's feelings to realize that statistics don't just mean that when you have an outlier, it somehow just like unravels all of the other previous shit. Just because you have that one guy who played Savage mode, and that's a hard mode, doesn't mean that one guy is reflective of more than just 1% of an audience. And that's my point, is like, if your ceiling could be like skyscraper high, it could be unbelievably high, right? It's possible for your skill ceiling to be so unbelievably high, and yet your floor be basically on the ground. Which is like, any idiot can pick up a controller and like play the game. The point being is like, sure, it might take a long time, or sorry, there might be a high level of play that takes a long time and investment to get to, but are most people going to be anywhere close to that level? Probably not. Which is why it's safe to say that a game like League of Legends is a casual game, right? Because the vast majority of people who play League of Legends don't play ranked. I always talk about statistics, guys, because I'm telling you, they really help you make arguments. Check this out. Let's see what we can find. How many League players play ranked? Because it actually matters if you specify an NA. Let's see. All right, this says play overall, so this might not be helpful. This is over this amount of players in a certain day. Let's see a ranked. Do they give us any rank statistics here? Guess not. I've seen it before. Maybe we could take rank distribution. But then we'd have to reverse engineer some of these statistics, which I don't really feel like doing. But put it this way. The majority of players, let's say you have a rank system which operates like League of Legends, right? Like, sorry, not rank system, but like your skill level system. So in your MMO, you have a challenger player and you have a bronze player. Or sorry, they have iron these days. You have an iron player. So if you look at the statistics here, 3%, 18%, 34%, give or take, right? So at about 54% or 55%, majority of your players are going to be worse than a silver skill level, which I would say would be average. So you've got about 55% of people are going to be like kind of average. But once you start to get to silver 1 and above that, now you're going into like above average category. And if you notice, gold has a big percentage of population as well, because this is above average players. That's still a big percentage of players. It's 29% of players, right? But if the claim is that most players are casual, or the game is casual, you could argue that it's actually a fair statement to make, right? Because you would say, well, the vast majority of players aren't playing it at the highest level, and that's just players who play ranked, which is already a smaller percentage of players, period. Which means that the only players who could experience Challenger, Grandmaster, Master, Diamond, or Platinum level of play would have to be top 15%. That's really fucking hard to do. So that's why you can't say, well, League's an awesome game. Have you ever seen Challenger games? They're super awesome. It's like, but not everybody has a Challenger game. Not everybody has a Master game. Not everybody has a Diamond game. So I think looking at statistics is really helpful. And to bring it back to MMOs, if in this particular case, I'm making an analogy, and let's say that these first 3 tiers are my normal raids, or sorry, this is not raiding. This is like maybe you did a couple dungeons, and this is doing like regular dungeon content. Anything past that is like the next level. And the Challenger player is the one who does all of the Savage level raids and like is world first and all that stuff. 0.02% of your audience, or less than 1% of your audience doing that highest level of content at that highest level doesn't mean that all of that other low level content doesn't exist. That's my main point. So essentially, I get when people say, yeah, but it has Mythic, and Mythic is harder than WoW. Like, that's the argument I hear a lot is, yeah, but Mythic content in WoW is harder than classic WoW's raids. And it's like, do you think that's a fair comparison? Because, let's just... Why wouldn't you make the fair comparison? Wouldn't the fair comparison be just comparing it to the actual raid? Like, the normal level? Right? But why doesn't someone want to compare it to the normal raid? Because it's easy as fuck. That's why. So it's like, if you compare a WoW classic raid to a WoW BFA raid at the regular level of gameplay, which is just whatever mode is, you play, right? The normal difficulty, if you will. This one's going to be way harder, dude. I'm sorry, it's going to be way harder. And so it's like, does that mean that WoW BFA doesn't have a high skill ceiling? Or isn't a complex game? No, it just means that in order to experience that, you've got to be 1% of the player base. Luck. Luck. Look. LOL is a bad example because bronze games are challenging for bronze players, while something like leveling in Final Fantasy XIV. Yeah, I'm not trying to make a skill argument here. So, sorry, that's a good point, Ace. I'm not trying to make a skill argument saying like the level of play is like exactly the same across the board, because obviously, like you said, within this tier, they are competing amongst each other. This tier, they're competing amongst each other. The point that I'm trying to make is by using League as an example, which has a big competitive audience, and yet only such small percentages of their audience make it to the highest levels. Even making it to Diamond means you have to be a top 4% player. Think about that. If my constant percentages are annoying you guys, let's use some actual statistics. Some numbers. Take 1 million players. What is 0.04% of 1 million players? 40,000, man. That's not a lot, dude. That's not a lot at all. You go from that number to this number? It's a huge difference. And by the way, it's way less than that, because way less people play ranked than 1 million in America. Sorry, at that tier, I should say. So the numbers are actually even worse, because the percentage of players in Grandmaster are only a few thousand. And a few thousand of what? Well, if we reverse engineer those numbers, which I don't have the brain cells to do because we've reached the end of this podcast, by the way, which my brain cells stop working after that point because I intermittent fast in the morning, which means it's time to eat. But anyway, you get my point? it's just it's a comparison of like, if you compare it to a competitive game, a game that's often considered competitive, like League, even in a competitive game, barely any of the players can compete. So using WoW mythic raids or savage raids in Final Fantasy XIV as an example of saying the game is difficult, it just doesn't follow. To me, it's just a non sequitur. Guild Wars 2 players made a raid completion statistic from a site where players enter their API. So this is screwed in favor of hardcore players. And only 10% of players completed the bosses in the last 2 wings. That's really, really helpful. Thank you for telling me that, Atlan. I'll show you another example in Final Fantasy XIV. If you go to the website where they handle population data, check this out. The player census. And I did all of this math in my Life of a Game video. I did all of this math in my Life of a Game video. But in here, check this out. They have active characters. And the way that they do it is they talk about characters who've claimed like a certain thing, which is from the 4.1 story. So most players would have done this, right? And yet, there's these many characters, and yet only these amount that are active, right? You see how like these numbers change drastically once you start to examine them? Statistics are helpful, but if you don't know how to like take the information, this looks like a big number that matters. This number doesn't really matter, right? Like the character number doesn't really matter. This matters. And yet you would ask yourself, so if they only have 748,000 overall in their world, does that mean that that's their sub count? No. That's the confusing thing. That's not their sub count. Because remember, these are players who've done a particular action in which they're considered to be active with that asterisk, which means that players in Final Fantasy XIV can boast that they have over 1 million subs. In fact, I think they do now. They can boast, we got 1 million subs. But is it the same thing as saying we have 748,000 active characters who've claimed the dress-up Rabon mount from the 4.1 story? It doesn't sound as sexy, but it's kind of just as useful. In fact, I think it's way more useful. Because now I actually know, okay, so from 4.1 story on, 748,000 of these players are active. Versus like the extra 400,000 that people are saying are still playing the game, but actually aren't active. See what I'm saying? So all I'm trying to illustrate really with my rant here at the end of the podcast is just statistics are helpful. They really are. And so if you're ever having a problem of being like, how good am I? How good is this? How good is this? How challenging is this? Look at statistics and look at statistics for the entire population. Because being top 2% in a city of 5 people, somebody's missing some limbs, but let's say in a city of being top 10% in a city of 10 people, only one person is top 10%. Only one person in that example, that small example, the 10-person town. Only one of those people would do that Guild Wars 2 raid. Only one of those people would do that WoW raid, right? It does matter about where your majority of your base is playing the game. If that part of the game is too easy, the game's easy. To be fair, there would be players who sub and haven't gotten to 4.1 yet. Right, but that's the point. That's why they came up with this metric. You realize that, right? They came up with a metric because they don't just want to count people who are just not doing the story, not even doing the expansion, because they're not considered active players. So it really does matter to make the distinction, because an active player, an account, and a sub is not, like, they're all different things. A character is just something you create in the game. A sub is what you pay on your account. An active character is somebody by whatever measure you're choosing to evaluate is active. Play daily, weekly, whatever else. The interesting thing is that you might ask, why don't people just look at monthly data, weekly data? Well, because there's so much loss of players, we don't know if that's as helpful as looking at just, a macro perspective. Being like, this amount of players, if you pass this zone, we're going to count you as active. Because otherwise, it's like, if you're not past this zone, you're kind of just like, at that point, not the active player base anyway. You're just the casual audience, which is still there, but not going to affect you as much as the active players here would. Anyway, Any last questions before I end, guys? How half those challenger spots are Smurfs of other big names. That's a good point, Sam. What's up, by the way? But that's a good point. It's just like, it's helpful when you talk about statistics to realize, like, is my dream of being a challenger player or a mythic raid player, is that realistic? And if you want to try and be the top 10% player of your game or whatever else, by all means, but it's not going to be easy. And you shouldn't use that as a method of saying, my game's challenging because only 1% of my content is very hard. I don't agree with that. You could reverse engineer the League of Legends ranked because there's only 200 players in Challenger. That's a good point. I should have used that as an example. So if you look at that percentage, you know it to be 200 people. Right. These days, even Pokemon MMOs have competitive tournaments, and those are more entertaining than the official ones. Server-to-server ecosystems also influence what people believe about the game. That's a good point. That's a really good point. If people think a game is dying because it doesn't seem alive, that does affect people's perception and does keep people from playing the game. We talk about that sometimes. What is 0.02 of 200? Shit. I don't even know. What is 0.02 of 200? Isn't that you just move the decimal places over, basically? Oh, 4 players. Congrats. 4 players. 4 of the players could do it. That's so many. It's almost enough for a group. When are the gamers rising up? Yeah, this isn't a call to rise up. Sorry if it... Sometimes I get a little bit passionate. It seems like I'm ranting about something in particular. But no, I was just kind of ranting about statistics, you know, and how they affect the way that you perceive things. And that from a player's perspective who's in the top 1%, they see the game as challenging because it is challenging to them. It is very difficult to them. It is all of those things. But it's not that way to everybody. And me, as somebody who talks about, you know, MMOs in their, you know, essentially like in their totality, I have to look at it from the perspective of like me, the hardcore player as well, because I'm a hardcore player. I can understand that 1%. But I also have to talk about the other players because they pay the bills. The majority of people playing your game aren't doing the hardest shit. Yeah, I don't want people to rise up in arms or whatever else, because I don't like inciting a mob that doesn't know why they have their pitchfork or doesn't know what their pitchfork is aimed towards, if that makes sense. I think we're leaving now, Carissus. Sorry, man. Bad timing. About 3% of the NA or EU player base. Wow. Didn't realize how few people actually cleared Savage raids in Final Fantasy. About 3% of the NA or EU player base and 20% of the Japanese player base. Thank you for finding those numbers, by the way. Can you tell us where you got those numbers from, just out of curiosity? Because I've heard those same numbers used when people have brought up that argument, where it's like, okay, so for 3% of the players, it's like that, but what about the other players? There's a harder tier than Savage, so what's the one above that? Savage Plus? Or Extra Savage? Man. I wonder what the statistics are on Ultimate. Oh, of course. It's Final Fantasy, right? It has to be Ultimate. Only 2 fights are Ultimate tier. Okay. How many people have completed those? That's like 1%? Okay. So 3% and 1% on 2 fights. Why are they not doing more Ultimate content, out of curiosity? Is that just because it only works on certain raids? So I guess I'll figure out all of this once I start playing, but I'm just curious. Was a Reddit post I got from some quick Googling. Oh, so people probably are pulling that from the numbers that Yoshida showed, right? He showed like some report or something like that. Okay, so they do 2 per expansion. I think in 3 months to do it, if I... Okay, 2 in Stormblood, 2 more coming in Shadowbringers. Gotcha. Final Fantasy 14 should start tomorrow. It's going to start this week, put it that way. I'm playing WoW Classic in my spare time because I'm kind of learning and brushing up on the game and making sure I'm not shit for when you guys come to watch me play at launch. But I haven't really been streaming that because it's just like private servers. You know, I'm not really doing anything in particular. I'm just kind of fucking around, questing, leveling, PvPing, like testing out builds and whatever else. But in Final Fantasy XIV, I could actually like level and do the gear treadmill. Well, sorry. I know there really isn't gear in the same way, but you guys know what I mean. The progression treadmill. PvP in Final Fantasy XIV is pure garbage that was forced in instead. It's a shame too, because like I'm one of those weird people who's been crying about that for a long time. That's fun. Ooh, you know what? Someday I will show you guys an old image of me in a pre-game Final Fantasy XIV guild. Yeah, pretty crazy, right? But I had a I was in a pre-game guild, and I really stoked about playing Final Fantasy 1.0. And yeah, I have to find that picture and I'll show that to you guys sometime. But you can see me with like my avatar. It's like the male from the commercial and all that stuff. That was funny. I have a lot of like, in fact, I think Ludens has found some of my old forum posts on the website. Like different places, like Mortal Online forums, Darkfall, find me on Rift, WoW, shit, what other forum? WildStar. Weird how all that shit still exists, huh? Anyway, I've reached the end of the podcast, guys. I'm just rambling at this point. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for watching the podcast. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We reached over 40 viewers, so I'm thankful for that. And yeah, using the Wayback Machine. Sometimes you can find it, and it's easy as just you see wherever it's populated, and you can just press it there. Sometimes you really have to go through it, and I just haven't really done that yet. But I'm sure I could find some other fun stuff to read to you guys. Like, I barely spoke tangible English when I was back on the forums, like at 7 to like 12 years old. It's so funny reading my old posts, man. They're horrible. But anyway, yeah, thanks for stopping by. Quick Champions is supposed to be coming out this week, so stay tuned for that. I should be playing some Final Fantasy XIV tomorrow, or sometime this week. I'm going to be streaming that for sure Saturday, so don't worry. Like, I'm trying to stream at least 1 or 2 days earlier in the day, and then 1 or 2 days later in the day, so I can attract both of my audiences, because I know I have some that play later and earlier, EU, NA, etc. Yeah, thanks for stopping by on this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed episode 43, and also our MMO Roundtable about the MMORPGs and their story, and if that should be still represented or supported in the MMO genre. So, got nothing else to say. I'm running out of saliva, brain cells, and you name it, so I'm going to give you guys a couple Fedora tips. My friends, thank you for stopping by. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.